Howdy, and welcome to another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I'm your host, Daniel Dauphin.
I wanted to take just a minute on this podcast episode to tell you a little bit about the online course that we are offering now, the Bit Course 2.0, Understanding How and Why Bits Function. You can find it at the website, thebitcourse.com, which will be linked in the show notes. This is a very comprehensive course. We've got two different versions. There's a masterclass version where weekly we have live calls and go over the modules and the study guide. That course has been running 25 to 30 hours over the course of 7 weeks. If you take that version, you're also eligible to go through our BIT certification program and take that test. It's at no additional cost if you want to add consulting about bits to your repertoire of body work or whatever else you might be doing. We also will have an evergreen version that you can take anytime you work at your own pace. It is less expensive. It's also a lot less content. You don't have the weekly Zoom calls with me. Those are going about 2 to 2.5 hours each week. So the masterclass course winds up 25, 30 hours long. The evergreen course you're going to do in 12 to 15, something like that. So check it out. You can go to thebitcourse.com, sign up for the free newsletter. You'll get a 30-minute video on the foamy mouth and all of the implications of that, as well as 5 or 6 articles that I've written regarding bits. Get a feel for the content. This will absolutely be some of the best money and time you have ever spent on your horsemanship journey, I assure you. And it is not discipline specific. We cover just about every aspect of the horse world that you can think of. I'm very pleased to have this conversation with our guest today, Miss Lynn Acton. Lynn has been certified by the Certified Horsemanship Association in Advanced English and Intermediate Western since 1994. In addition to conventional lessons, she has also taught in therapeutic horsemanship programs for at-risk youth that got national attention. Her diverse interests led her to lessons in jumping, classical dressage, Western, centered riding, groundwork, natural horsemanship, dressage, musical freestyle, obstacle training, and clicker training. She has learned from Sally Swift's centered riding apprentices, Wendy Murdoch, Susan Harris, and Mitzi Summers. Her current focus is on horse behavior, emotions, and learning. She has an academic background in sociology and systems science, so we are going to have a bit of a sciencey conversation here, I am guessing. Miss Lynn is also the author of a book, What Horses Really Want, where she introduces the topic that I like quite a bit, protector leadership. Miss Lynn, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great, Daniel. How about you?
Doing well. Well, I certainly appreciate, as we are recording this one, we've got our first major winter storm of the country going on, and I know that wreaks a little havoc with those of us that have to go outside and tend to animals first thing every morning. So I certainly appreciate you braving the cold to join me today.
Yeah, the worst part of the winter storms is what to do with the manure. We've got heated water buckets, the horses have blankets, but you can't get to the manure pile.
We're in the South, and so we don't ever get frozen ground. We have mud to end all mud all winter long. So I would,
worse.
It's all the different challenges. I've heard of people trying to pick frozen manure and breaking teeth and stuff, and I would imagine that it has its own challenges. Yes, ma'am.
It does.
Well, we start everybody off with the lightning round question, and these are for points and prizes, so be sure to be on your A game here. Okay, are you ready?
I guess I'm as ready as I'm going to be.
If you were a Jedi, what % chance is there that you would misuse the Force?
I'd say at least 80%.
All right. Honesty to start it off. That's a good way to go.
Oh, yeah.
Morning or evening?
I like evenings.
Okay. So if you're working on a project like another book or something, are you sharpest in the evening? Is that when you like to get your work done, or middle of the day, or what?
It's really variable. It's like at certain moments, a great idea will hit me, usually when I'm scooping manure in a stall. And I get, oh yeah, this is how I can explain this, or here's a connection I need to make sure I add. So it's kind of hit or miss all day long, but I try and start out something in the morning, and then I usually end up working on it at 10, 11 o'clock at night too.
But my biggest helper in life and business is the voice recorder on my phone, because those kind of ideas always hit me when I'm driving or, some innocuous thing and I have to capture it before it's gone. So I know just what you mean there. How long do you dunk a cookie in milk?
Depends how long it takes it to get soft. Probably 5 to 10 seconds.
So are you more a soggy cookie person or a crunchy cookie person?
No, I want them soggy. I want them to melt in my mouth.
Right there with you.
Especially the ginger snaps.
A good ginger snap that's definitely you have to be a certain age to appreciate that. It's almost like whiskey. When you're young, you won't like it, but when you get older, I didn't like them at all when I was a kid, and I can hurt a bag of ginger snaps now for sure.
Yep.
If the world did not recognize Clark Kent with his glasses on, do you think that his optometrist knew Superman's secret?
Oh boy. If it were current times, I'd say he bought his glasses off the internet, but that wouldn't have worked back then. So, yeah, that's a darn good question. Maybe he just sent somebody else to the optometrist to get glasses and got clear lenses in the frames. There had to be some trick going on there.
Maybe so. That's true, because he didn't really need them, did he? Adds another
Apparently
layer.
Not.
Yeah, I like it. What skill or technique do you not currently have with a horse that you admire in someone else and would like to work on?
I always admire watching Jack ride because she's so balanced, so relaxed, and so just with the horse. She's one of those people who make it look so easy. And then I go out to ride and it's like, okay, I'm channeling Jack. I want to feel like she looks. I'm not there yet.
And Lynn is referring to our mutual friend Jack Ballou there, who does indeed have a very very good seat on a horse. Nice balance, nice posture. It probably helps a lot that she weighs about 102 pounds also.
Yeah, right.
What would you say is the most important quality of a horseman or horsewoman?
I think I'd say empathy. Empathy. If you can't imagine where the horse is coming from, then it's like trying to communicate with somebody who speaks another language. You need some sense of what the horse is feeling in order to have an idea how to work with him, where he is, and then how to help him get to where you want him to be. And interestingly, Margie Goldstein Engel, the jumper rider of the year many, many times over, actually wrote an article years ago saying empathy was her secret ingredient in being able to get on and ride so many different jumpers so well.
So would you say that that is a trait that, while necessary, also you have to have moderation with? So
No.
what I mean by that, no. This is where I'm coming from. Like, I find there are people who are a little too soft-hearted at times, and they're never willing to do what needs to be done. So I'm kind of thinking like let's say you have a 2-year-old that you have to take the shots for tots, and they're crying and they're bothered, and the gruff old nurse just gives them the shot, gets it over with, it's done. 45 seconds, they're out the door, everything's good, they have their lollipop. Or you could spend 10 minutes hemming and hawing and you prolong everything rather than just doing what you know you need to do for the good and kind of getting it over with. So do you find those types of situations where maybe too much empathy would be a bad thing?
Well, I think we're saying the same thing, Daniel. But when I define empathy, I'm thinking long-term. So what's the best long-term thing for that little kid? Do you want to like throw him in the deep end there and have him for the rest of his life go, oh my God, shots, I'm so scared? Or do you want to take that extra couple of minutes, make sure that you set things up to be as positive as is possible under the circumstances, so you figure the next time you don't have a big fight with him, he's like, shots, Okay, but I'm going to get my lollipop and everybody's going to tell me I'm a good kid. And so when I say empathy, I don't mean softness, because like being a good parent, empathy means thinking we've got to think of the horse's long-term benefit. So if I say to the horse, "Oh, you don't feel like doing this today? You don't feel like picking your feet up for the farrier today?" That's not empathy. That's abdicating my responsibility as a leader to say, yeah, farrier's here. You need your feet done. And so we're going to make sure we make this as pleasant as possible for you, but the job still has to get done. So when I say empathy, I mean understand where they're coming from and take that into account. But it doesn't mean they get to say, no, I don't feel like doing whatever you said you wanted them to do.
I like it. Yes, ma'am. Well said.
That's why I figured I figured you and I are probably on the same page on that one.
I think we are on most stuff. Yes, ma'am. On a scale of 1 to 10, how well can you back a trailer?
I'm sorry. Confession time here. I have a vision problem that makes my depth perception faulty. And so I don't even dare drive a trailer because I can't see where objects are. And because it's a binocular vision problem, objects are not where they appear to be, and they don't stay in the same wrong place. So I never have learned to compensate. So nobody in their right mind would let me drive a trailer at all, let alone back it up.
That's good information to have. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it actually was the reason I had to quit jumping, because I realized that I did not know where the jump was until I felt the horse take off.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay if you're jumping relatively low courses. You get to bigger jumps, you need to be able to help the horse out a little bit. But
Yes,
every horse I jump, I can tell you for a fact that all horses can find their spot, because I never tried to tell a horse where his spot was after the first time that I tried that, landed on top of the jump. Ever since then, I let every horse know, I'm just a passenger here. I'll stay out of your way, but you got to figure out where the jump is. And they always did.
Bay or sorrel? Do you have a favorite color? It could be something else, but
I subscribe to the view that a good horse is never a bad color. But I gotta say, I was always kind of partial to sorrel. I just kind of like that color, and turns out my Arab bronze was sorrel, and I heard those stories about how sorrels can be sullen and unreliable. Did you ever hear those stories?
The chestnut mare kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, ma'am.
And did you know there's some science behind that? It was, you probably heard this when there's a veterinarian, I think he was in England, who got sick of hearing that chestnut mares were crazy. So he sent out a questionnaire to I think it was 1,000 horse people, and asked them about their horses' traits between bay and chestnut. And what he came back with was that chestnuts tended to be bolder. And that can be a good thing. You get that trail horse and you want them to be willing to tackle pretty much anything. And that's good bold. You get a horse that you treat in a way that he considers unfair, and he might be bold enough to fight back. And that was my bronze. Like he would do anything, nothing. Not that he was never scared, but even when he was scared, he could do exactly what I asked him to do. He would face down anything. But I always had that sense if somebody treated him unfairly, they'd be sorry.
Well, this is one of those questions I started off asking just as kind of a filler, and I was really shocked when anecdotally the results come back about 9 out of 10 people prefer bay horses, and I thought naturally it would just be about 50-50. So for those of you,
isn't that wild?
It is, yes, ma'am. And so we have started what I call affectionately the Bay Horse Mafia. And I know I have teased this, but we do now actually have merch on the website, so you can get notebooks, T-shirts, hoodies, all with our new Bay Horse Mafia logo on them on the website. So check that out in the show notes if you're a member.
No, why do you figure that is?
I have no idea. I mean, I wasn't expecting it, but it's been a very strong trend of people preferencing bay horses.
I am
So
shocked. Wow. Okay.
I don't know. That's not my preference. I prefer grays and buckskins, and so I like the contrast. But for whatever reason, bay horses have been very strong.
Interesting. And by the way, I am very partial to buckskins too. One of the most fun horses I rode as a teenager was a buckskin mare.
I say anything but Palamino. All Palaminos are dumb as a
Oh no, no,
post
no.
and should be
Whoops.
eradicated.
Whoops. My husband's first mare was a Palamino, and she was awesome. She was one of those horses. Everybody thought she was like a dominant mare, boss mare. This whole. Turned out underneath she was really very sensitive, and a lot of the behavior that other people mistook for aggressiveness was really her defensiveness because she was so sensitive. My husband was always a dog person, so he was a lot more inclined to be cuddly, friendly, and they got along so well. She looked out for him. 12 years they trekked the state land trails here, and she never let him fall off, and she always got him out of trouble. So yeah, but I have heard of some really, really awful, difficult palominos. So I can imagine where you're coming from.
I will have to say, and I don't know why, but I have dealt with a very strong majority of both grays and palominos that are kind of on the dumb side. Not that they're bad horses necessarily, they just are slower about it. Just takes longer to get everything across to it. Now I've definitely ridden exceptions to that. I've got a palomino mare here right now that I like quite a bit, but for whatever reason I've seen quite a few palominos and grays that just were of below average intelligence, which honestly for the average owner probably makes them an ideal choice because they're not gonna figure out how to push the owner's buttons and work around them. But for whatever reason, I've seen that little trend myself. Could also be I've ridden same bloodlines that just happened to be gray, but it was a different
Yeah,
deal.
we never figured out my husband's mare's bloodlines. She could have been Morgan, quarter horse, some thoroughbred. There was no telling, but she was definitely one of the savvy ones.
Mm.
So maybe we just got lucky.
Yes, ma'am. Dogs or cats?
Oh no, I couldn't make a choice. I love them both, and we've got both.
What type of dog do you prefer?
Oh gosh, we've had the whole range of mixes, but so we've had Collie mix, Shepherd mix, Chessie mix, Rottweiler mix, and currently, quite by accident, we have a purebred black lab.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. Does pineapple belong on pizza?
Yes, it's the only way to eat pizza. Only way.
Are you a cook?
No, I'm lucky. My husband's a cook. He loves to cook. He's a good cook. I'd probably end up eating an awful lot of cereal and silly stuff if it were up to me.
Well, that might be good with the depth perception thing. It might be a little hard to flip an egg correctly or whatever. You go a little too deep, or so.
Yeah, that might be part of the problem. Yep, chopping things is not great either if you can't see what you.
Yeah, tip of your finger may well be in danger. Yes, ma'am.
Yep.
Would you share with us your horse industry related pet peeve?
Oh wait, no. We're gonna be here for 24 hours. I think it depends what topic we're on as to what my pet peeve is. One of the biggies is just that people don't take the time to look at where's the horse standing emotionally. They're all focused on what's he doing, where are the feet going, is he carrying his head where I want him to carry his head, did he jump when I said jump, and instead of looking at and then if the horse doesn't do what they want, they assume that he's being disobedient on purpose. Instead of looking at him and saying, well, wait a minute, why didn't he do that? Is he hurting? Is he confused? Is he anxious? And I think there's a whole lot more anxiety and defensiveness in horses than most people ever see. And along with that, a little more specifically, early weaning is another one of my pet peeves, because I think that sets horses up for a lot of that anxiety.
Feral or spoiled? Which would you rather mess with? And I'll ask as a caveat, do you believe that spoiled is an option, or would you rather categorize that another way?
Spoiled horse, you mean?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, sadly, I think that definitely can be the case. If you get somebody who does not know how to set limits and maintain appropriate, fair limits, it's easy to have a horse who thinks, well, I should have what I want when I want it. And if you don't give it to me, then I'm going to let you know I'm not happy with you. His second mare came a little spoiled in that way. She figured people were walking vending machines. And when she came up and nuzzled, you should give her a treat. And you know what you do to vending machines if they don't produce the goods, right? So if she didn't get the treat when she nuzzled, then it was poke harder. We might even go as far as nipping. And it was a problem. And it was not, there was no meanness on her part. We met the previous owner. The previous owner had bought the horse as a 2-year-old. So mind you, the horse is 2. The owner has taught that she is fully trained and ready for a beginner to ride. So you can see none of that was the horse's fault.
Yes, ma'am. I do talk about that sometimes when people are going to buy a horse, that the previous owner's opinion of the horse may or may not be valid. They may actually believe that what they're telling you is true, but they may not know enough to have any idea that what they're saying is ridiculous. So I think a lot of times what is really ignorance gets confused for malicious intent or something like that, you know.
Oh, I think that happens all the time. And I think that was the case with this too. The woman assumed that all the problems were her fault. She didn't realize she'd been had. And that she'd gone into it in good faith, if lack of research on her part. But yeah, she told us what she believed to be true. And I knew enough about horses by then to know that there was a whole lot more to the story than what she understood.
Yeah, not all opinions are to be weighed the same, for sure.
Right.
What is your least favorite barn chore?
Oh my. Having to ice legs or feet when somebody has an injury or we suspect laminitis. Getting the ice on and hanging around and waiting for it to be iced, that's probably my least. The rest of the barn work, the everyday stuff, I'm okay with.
So I actually have a pretty good little tip for you on that if you have to do that very often. You know the tubular popsicles, the pop ice things for kids?
Yeah.
And they come all stuck together. And so you get a group of those and you freeze them and then you wrap the leg and then a polo wrap or something on top of that. And I mean, in 30 seconds, you're done. It's
That's awesome.
The quickest, simplest, easiest. Yep. And then you throw them back in the fridge. And when the grandkids come to the barn, you hand them one and they have, maybe it smells a little bit like absorbine or, you know, well, you wash the furacin off, but I mean, hey, it works.
That sounds awesome. Most recently, his horse got a swollen knee, and we're going like, well, the good thing is it's snow here, so our standard is we put a shipping boot on and pack the ice in the shipping boot. It's like, well, we don't have to go get ice; just go scoop up a couple of handfuls of snow, tuck them in the shipping boot, and that worked pretty good too. But summertime, those popsicles sound like a great idea.
It really is, yes, ma'am. Favorite barn chore?
Oh, putting out the hay, I think, because the horse is always so appreciative. Like, oh, yay, hey, our favorite thing to eat. We're so happy you're here with it. Actually, not their favorite thing, but our second favorite thing after the bucket meal.
I enjoy feeding time myself.
Mm-hmm.
Good opportunity to go lay eyes on everybody too and just be,
Yeah.
you know, checking things out. Crunchy or smooth peanut butter?
Smooth. Smooth for sure.
Would you tell us something unexpected about you?
Oh, something unexpected. I don't know. I feel like I'm pretty ordinary. Well, maybe something unexpected would be was when my husband was in the service back in '76. We lived in Japan for 6 months, not in an urban area, but in a tiny fishing village on the northern end of Honshu, and it was a blast.
Okay.
One of
Very fresh seafood, I'm sure. Yes, ma'am.
yes, that indeed. You walk through the grocery store and there'd be a giant fish laying on the floor. They just slice off a chunk of it when you wanted some fish.
So where you are in New England, are you near coastal areas where you can get good seafood there as well?
No, I'm actually in upstate New York, so we are 4 hours from the coast.
Okay. Well, are you closer to the Great Lakes? You have that available? Or?
We're actually close to the Finger Lakes.
Okay.
So no, we're not in any place that we get good seafood.
That would be hard for me. I'm pretty used to good seafood. That would be I've done it, but I didn't like it. Live in places where you didn't have it, you know.
Oh, it would be nice to have that, and I love the ocean. That's one of my favorite things. My daughter lives in Virginia Beach, and it doesn't matter what time of year I visit. If it's February, I'm going to go out and walk on the beach in my bare feet, even if I'm wearing a winter coat at the same time. I just love the ocean.
Yes, ma'am. Thoughts or feelings? Do you consider yourself to be more of a cerebral, logical thinking, rational person, or more of an intuitive, feel it out, go with your gut type of person?
I'm going to say I got one foot solidly on each side because you can't do one without the other. Thoughts have feelings behind them, but if we don't have the thoughts to temper the feelings, then we have a little bit of chaos. So, yeah, in fact, this is part of what fascinates me about horses is that interplay of thoughts and feelings. And I think horses are much more influenced by feelings than most people realize, but they're also capable of a lot more thinking than most people realize.
That's well said. Yes, ma'am. What would you have been professionally if not a horsewoman?
Well, actually, I was several other things along the way. I was a social worker for a while, and then I studied computers and I did technical education for IBM for a while. And all of that, it's weird, but everything that I've done has in some way played into the skills that I have to do what I do now.
Are you decisive or indecisive?
Oh, my husband would be busting a gut over that one. I'm very indecisive. Well, I did let me take that back. See, here we go, indecisive already. It depends on some things. But in general, yeah, I can be pretty indecisive because I can think of too many different possibilities. I'm always trying to think too far ahead of, well, if this, then what? And then if that other thing, then what else?
Do you have a favorite piece of tack or horse-related tool?
Well, it's pretty mundane, but my most basic tool with the horses is a regular halter and either a nice long rope lead or a set of reins I can clip onto the halter. And with those two pieces, I can do a lot of stuff. They're very adaptable.
Yes, ma'am. Are your hands or your legs better?
Hands are better.
Okay. It does make sense because when we're doing groundwork, we're still employing our hands and we're not really doing leg things at that point in time. I feel like my legs are better just naturally, but and then left lead or right lead, do you have one that comes more natural to you or one that you have to be more intentional or thoughtful of?
That's a super good question, and it's real clear to me. I'm much more comfortable on the left lead. My body just wants to say left lead, and I have to always keep in mind to keep switching and think harder about getting the right lead.
Do you know if you are right or left foot dominant? Like if I tossed a soccer ball out there and said, go kick that as hard as you can, which foot would you kick it with?
The right. It would have to be the right.
Okay. So
Yeah.
that's kind of, I've had a little theory going on here that right-footed people would be left lead dominant, but we have actually had a couple people that were counter to my theory. So it's at least not a 100% correlation, but maybe an 80% correlation, something like that.
That's significant. But I think one of the reasons, and I finally figured this out when I had a lesson with Wendy Murdoch. Actually, no, I figured it out. Wendy helped me with it. I figured out when I started riding my horse bareback and figured out that every time I had him trot, I started slipping off to the right, and finally realized I sit heavier on my right seat bone unless I'm not careful. And of course, if you're sitting heavier on your right seat bone, you're cueing the right hind leg, which naturally brings up the left lead. So that's part of the reason, I think, that I'm left lead dominant.
One of my, just to be honest and vulnerable here, one of my very first horse jobs was starting race horses for the track. And of course, you just go left all the time, and you do way more trotting than you do galloping or cantering. And so I posted jillions and jillions of miles on the left diagonal. And to this day, that's been almost 30 years ago. To this day, if I'm going to pick up the right diagonal, I start the left double bounce and go into it real fast. And if you were watching me and knew what to look for, you probably see me do it. But I'm so strongly hooked to the left diagonal, I cannot break the deal. I don't know.
No, you're saying left diagonal, not left lead?
Left diagonal, yes, ma'am. For posting.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Just for if I'm posting, yes, ma'am. I'm also left lead dominant, so I have to be a little more thoughtful about the right lead than the left. But the posting thing, that's just one of those habits that has stuck with me so strongly. And I'm never, it's, I'm not an English writer, so that's not the kind of thing I'm being judged on. So I don't really pay it a ton of attention and really have worked on it or anything. But it's just one of those things I have to be conscious of if I'm am trying to be a little more technical.
Well, sure. And if you're working a horse in the trot and they're not in a position to be, or they're not strong enough for the sitting trot, then you want to be posting anyway. So, yeah.
What is the best smell in the barn?
The smell of the horse's muzzle. And my Brandy is used to that. I every day I have to a couple of times cup her muzzle against my face so I can inhale that scent.
That's mildly gross, I'm going to be honest with you.
Really? No. Horses have way cleaner mouths and faces, I think, than people do. I think it smells good.
I'm thinking about parasite loads and all kinds of stuff right now. Okay. Sweet, salty, or spicy?
Oh, both. Both. Maybe, yeah, both.
Okay. What is your favorite dinosaur or deep sea creature?
Dolphins. They're not deep sea enough. I don't know. I've always been fascinated with dolphins since I was in junior high, and I was reading about Lily's experiments with dolphins and their intelligence, and that has just always fascinated me. And then the way that dolphin and orca trainers developed clicker training too, and so that was, that was a real fascination. When I read about how and why did they develop clicker training, because they, you can't be in there to pat a doll or tell him he did something wrong. So you have to be able to train entirely with positive reinforcement. And that was a very interesting change from what we're accustomed to as horse people.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, negative reinforcement kind of lends itself to feel, but when you're remote, it changes the picture.
It really does. Yeah.
And have you ever had a UFO encounter?
No, we thought we did one time. We were driving across Texas in the middle of nowhere, and I guess there's a lot of roads like that in Texas because it's such a big state. And we saw these flashing lights ahead of us. and they looked like a circular pattern, and there was nobody else around, and it was a very dark night, and we started going slower and slower, and it turned out that there was some bizarre traffic. I say bizarre only because it was unexpected, but it was some configuration of construction zone lights out in the middle of absolutely nowhere, but we really thought we were coming up on a UFO.
All right. Well, that's our final question, and let me tabulate your score here.
I hope I won something good.
Yes, ma'am. I've got you at 4,724 points, which makes you our highest scoring person ever to do the lightning round questions. And that entitles you to either a genuine compliment or an awkward silence, your choice.
Well, now that's a tough choice. I'll take the genuine compliment.
All right. Well, so the thoughts or feelings question you had mentioned about having one foot in either, and I really find most people to be pretty dominantly one way or the other, but I think you are one of those people that straddles that line quite well. You've got that blend of art and science about you. I find, like in your book here, you've definitely got some original thoughts, which I appreciate. I get a little sick of the rehashed topics in new words, but the same old thing over and over again. And so I appreciate the way that your mind works and your thoughtfulness on that type of stuff. But you do also definitely, you're not just clinical and academic about it. You clearly do have a heart for the horse and all of that stuff involved in it as well. So that's my compliment for you.
Thank you. That's a wonderful compliment, Daniel, because that was exactly what I was aiming for in the book.
Well, I will also say, not to sound juvenile, but I really like all the pictures and everything. I am a good reader, but sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words, and a lot of those do help tie everything together and kind of give you where you might have an abstract thought in your head. Sometimes that picture ties it in and says, oh, this is exactly what they were talking about. So I appreciate that.
That's good to hear, too, because we worked really, really hard on those pictures. My husband was a photographer, and he's mostly bird photographer. So getting him to take pictures of something that doesn't have feathers was a challenge, but he's supportive. So he came out there and he figured out how to get pictures of horses, which, as you probably know, is a non-trivial endeavor in the first place, because you don't want the shadows. You don't want the horse dirty. Everything has to look good. But then you also want to have the horse doing what you want to describe, because I hate seeing pictures where the caption says something and I'm looking at the horse who's doing something different than what the caption says. It's like, then don't bother with the picture. So getting the picture to show exactly what I wanted it to show was a real challenge. And my husband was always looking at it from the point of view of a photographer who's also a horse person, but he always wanted the perfect picture. And I always wanted the picture to show what I wanted the picture to show. And there were a number of times that our discussion got long enough that the horse who was waiting for us would just kind of give me this message like, can I just go eat some grass while you guys figure this out? But they were good sports, and we ended up and our idea was the National Geographic concept. If people went through and did nothing but read the captions on the pictures, would they learn something?
Well, I think you did a very good job there, and I, having done more in video, but I definitely empathize with what you're saying there. I have certainly spent 3 weeks trying to capture one shot of a horse doing a specific thing where the light was right and it showed, I'm riding the horse and I know the horse did what I wanted it to do, but for whatever reason the camera didn't seem to show that, and we got to do it over and over. It can be a heart in soul crushing endeavor sometimes trying to capture that right moment. So
yes. And so many times I was saying to the horse, I'm really sorry. I know you did that exactly right, but please, just would you humor me and do it again, please?
Well, the first question I normally ask everybody is, would you give us the 30,000 foot view of what it is that you do in the horse world?
I try and connect dots. I never could just pick one person or one system and say, okay, this is it, because it never is. No one person has all the answers, and no one approach has all the answers. So I love looking for new ideas, and then I want to see how do they fit together. So I've taken Carolina Westland's courses on animal emotions and resolving challenging behavior. You probably haven't heard of her because she's not specifically a horse person, but she's a professor of, neuroscience or biological science or something like that at a university in Sweden. And she does fabulous online courses that hit a nice balance between the science and the practical application. So I've studied what she has to say. I've watched video after video of people who do liberty work to understand how do they do what they do. Is the horse really bought in, or is the horse just being trained to do what he needs to do because otherwise there's some unpleasant consequence? Let's see, what was the question? Okay, the question was the bird's eye view of what I do.
Yes, ma'am.
It's trying to learn from as many different places as possible and then see how they fit together. So if you look at emotions and how horses learn and where's their intelligence and what are the traditional training methods and where does all this fit together? And my goal is always what can we put together to have a horse who is safe and reliable for the person, but also we've got good horse welfare so that the horse is really happy doing what he's doing. Because to me, a happy cooperative partner is always going to be the most reliable horse.
So let me, you mentioned horse emotions there for a minute, and this is one of those topics. I feel like the horse industry is kind of like a pendulum that shifts, swings one way and maybe goes a little too far that way and comes back towards center, and then next thing you know, it's swinging a little too far off in another direction. And the emotional aspect of it would be one. I think we're too far off in a direction right now. So my thought would be that yes, horses definitely have emotions. That being said, I don't think they have precisely the same emotions or to the same degree that humans have. And I think that's an important aspect to understand, because I really think one of the more harmful things that we tend to do is the anthropomorphization of horses and starting to treat them like they are. My horse is my therapist. Your horse is not your therapist. Your horse is not an omniscient being or anything that knows more than you do and has a plan for you. And your horse is just a horse, which is enough. They don't need to be more than a horse, but
Exactly.
it's just a horse. So what would be your thoughts on that? Am I off course on the emotional side of that, and they do have exactly the same emotions and all that we have, or what do you think?
Well, I think this is to me, this is a really exciting topic because there's a lot of new stuff coming out that actually fits a lot of things that people have been observing over the years. Up until about 20, 25 years ago, the scientific community basically said animals didn't have emotions. Everything was based on instinct or conditioning. And so a lot of the horse training methods that were developed in the late 1900s reflect that. It's just like we just focus on what do we want the horse to do, and then we condition him to do it, and we repeat it until he just automatically does it. And never looked at the emotions behind that because, scientifically, horses didn't have emotions, but they do. And there was one fellow, Jaak Pansep, who did a lot of study on animals and their emotions. He was a neuroscientist, and he was told if he studied the animals' emotions, his career was going to be over. Well, he did it anyway. And what he discovered using electronic probes was that all mammals share the same 7 core emotions. Some of them are positive, some of them are negative. There's no neutral emotions. But all mammals biologically share the same 7 core emotions. What's still under debate is the complex combinations of those emotions. So everybody feels fear, everybody feels panic and grief, everybody feels rage, Everybody can feel play, the joy of play, and curiosity and social bonds. All of these things are emotions that all mammals share. But do horses feel, do they have a sense of humor? Do they get jealous? Do they have pride? Do they care if they win a ribbon? Those are the questions, and that's where I think people are in danger of anthropomorphizing. If you look at a horse and you think that horse is scared, yeah, that horse is scared. Trust what you're seeing. He really is scared. But if you say, "Oh, my horse is sorry we didn't win a ribbon today," we're really, and to say that horses take pride, but pride in what? I've never known a horse who acted like he took pride in winning a ribbon, but I definitely felt when I first rode my bronze in some shows, took him to a hunter show just to get used to the whole show idea. And we did one day of show and tell at the showgrounds, and then went back for the next time they had a show, and went in the flat class. And by halfway through the class, he knew that the announcer was going to tell us what we were going to do next. And so he would do his half halt. He'd be all ready for. So as soon as the announcer said something, I could feel Bronze rebalance himself all ready for my cue. And I think he was proud of himself that he figured that out. And I think horses like figuring things out. In fact, I think that's kind of what Tom Dorrance was talking about when he said you want to set a horse up for something and give him a chance to figure it out. I think horses feel good. Maybe pride's not the right word, but I think they get a good feeling. And the thing that's most important in dealing with horses' emotions, it's not knowing exactly which one they feel, but is it positive or negative? If I'm working with a horse and he's looking like he's feeling good about what we're doing, great, we can keep on going. If he's not feeling so good about it, I need to stop and think about where's this going to go then? Are we heading it down a bad path? Do we need to make an adjustment?
And you started this off talking about Jock Pangsap. Wasn't he the one that discovered that rats laugh? Or am I confusing him from some?
No, you are absolutely right. It was, and I loved that story. He was studying play in rats, and he discovered that if he stuck his hand in their cage and tickled their tummies, they kept coming back for more and coming back for more. So one of his grad students set up a bat detector, which picks up high-pitched sounds. And they said the room erupted in what sounded like laughter. The rats were having a blast. That's why they kept coming back for more.
We just can't hear it, but yes, ma'am.
Yeah, we can't hear it, but yeah, they loved it. And and Pansap's comment on that was, you show an animal a really good time, and they get so fond of you, you can't believe it. Mm-hmm. And I think that applies to horses in the sense of when we make their work or their rules a positive thing for them that they feel good about it, then they're all in. That's when we get those great working partners.
Yeah, I do. Sometimes people will talk about like a horse can't have a work ethic, that's a man-made deal. I would definitely not agree with that. I've seen plenty of horses that knew exactly what their job was, and they were gung-ho to go do their job. They absolutely had a work ethic, and they would hang in there with you until things were done. I can't say all horses are that way, right? That would be a positive trait I would be looking for, but there definitely are those that have that trait. And I would say like a sense of humor. I have seen some horses that there was too clear of a pattern of things that they had done over and over where, yes, clearly he's messing with me right now and he's enjoying messing with me there. So
what do you see as how horses express their sense of humor? Do you see a pattern to that or a particular types of things that they like to do?
It can be different things. I mean, I've seen horses that would, like, you're saddling them and they'll reach around there and move the saddle pad or something, and just kind of just little things like that. Or I'm not gonna say this is the kind of thing everybody will pick up on, but you definitely have these times where horses the light comes on, they figure out what the thing is, and then they start testing the thing a little bit. Like, let's say ground tying, you can put them back in the same spot over and over and over, and then there comes a point at which you realize that the horse has realized what the thing is, that this is, and then they start to systematically test the thing and find the boundaries, not only what it is, but what it isn't. And there are definitely horses that will do that in a way that I can't describe it in any way other than humorous. It's like they really start to enjoy testing those boundaries, but they do it in a way that's just hilarious. And I can't say it's a ton of them that are that way, maybe 1 in 20 or something, but there's some horses I definitely would have to say have a sense of humor. And I enjoy the heck out of them.
I love that too. And just what you described, I saw that a lot in my bronze. He knew the rule was if your stall door is open, you still don't come out until you're invited to come out. The feet stay behind the door sill. But many times I would catch him from the corner of my eye, turn around to get some hay or get a water bucket or something, and he'd have 1 foot out the door. And he'd be watching me, like out of the corner of his eye, like, so Lynn, you got to catch me? And he'd just be waiting for my reaction. And I think that's great because they're thinking. They can't show a sense of humor unless they're thinking. I love having them think.
Absolutely. You'd mentioned before about early weaning. That was one of your pet peeves within the industry. And the textbooks will say 4 to 6 months. That's when we should wean a foal. What is your belief on that?
Well, when I was a kid, 6 months was standard. And and then there were some studies that showed that by 3 months, if you switch a horse from mom's milk to commercial feed, they'll grow at least as well. Maybe they'll even grow faster. And those studies never took into account the emotional need of a young mammal for the nurturing they get from a mother. And and that's huge. And this, again, is true of a lot of mammals, especially social mammals. So what happens with a foal normally is the foal is hanging around with mom, and then he gets braver, and he wanders off, and then he loses mom. And so he gets all that cortisol in his body. Oh, my gosh, where's mom? I'm scared. I'm all by myself. He whinnies. Mom whinnies back. They're reunited. And then he feels better. And this happens over and over. He ventures further and for longer. And while this is happening, his brain is developing the brain circuits that say, life is okay. I can cope with life because when I get too scared, somebody else is there to help me. Oh, and now I'm getting to where I can go further and I feel braver by myself. And it takes 6 or 8 months for the foal's mind to fully develop. What happens when a horse is weaned early, especially if they're forcibly weaned and then left by themselves or even with a bunch of other weanlings, then they're flooded with that cortisol and they get no relief. And they cry for mom and she never comes, and they cry and they cry. And finally they go silent, and people say, well, he's gotten over it. He hasn't. He's given up. He's now in grief. And people accept this as normal because they see it all the time. And what's happened now is he has become sensitized to anxiety and separation. When I was a kid, I worked for a horse dealer. So I rode a whole bunch of different horses. He didn't do lame horses. So mostly I think a lot of the horses that came through were horses that other people had problems with. One of the problems we never had was riding a horse alone. Could always take any horse anywhere by himself. Can you do that today? I don't think so. Most people over and over are talking, I can't get my horse to leave other horses. And this is one of the results of weaning early, is that the horse has become sensitized to anxiety, and in particular, separation anxiety. So it's created a huge, huge problem that people don't need to have.
So one of the correlations I would make there is what you're describing with the colt wandering away. He gets scared. He gets this shot of cortisol and all of the stress stuff, and then he comes to mom. That's essentially his system of self-regulation that's starting to develop. The same thing we're trying to do when we're desensitizing, or what we call desensitizing for the most part. I would definitely say that, and it's hard for me to put a line on it. Like if I'm going to halter break a group of colts and some of them are weaned at 4 months and 6 months, I'll be able to tell the difference. The 4 month
Really?
olds will not be as stable as the 6 month olds for sure. I don't know if, and again, horses aren't born with a calendar in their head. But I think prior to 6 months, if you can avoid it, is definitely better not to wean before 6 months. And if you can go a little longer than so much, the better. I would also say I always think of these little weaning pins where we take the 8 foals we had this year and we put them all together. That becomes like Lord of the Flies,
Yes.
for the
True.
3 more dominant colts that are in there. They're probably going to come out of it okay, but for those bottom 3 that need a little more support, that is hell incarnate going on right there. And it's kind of unfortunate that we do things that way, but I don't know if we'll ever quite break that. But
Well,
anyway,
people will change it when they understand that you can save a lot of problems later if you don't do that. Because your Lord of the Flies analogy really fits. I mean, I've always thought of it as like take a bunch of kindergartners and turn them loose together, and who's teaching them how to get along with anybody. And that's the other piece of weaning that people could do to make it much easier on a youngster, and that is have another horse with the at least one other adult horse, but preferably multiple horses of different ages and genders with the foal before he's weaned, and let him learn to get along and develop a relationship with other horses. There was a study in Europe, forget which breed it was, but anyway, it was free roaming horses, and what they discovered was that the more adults were with the youngsters, the better social skills the weanlings developed. And I got to see this in action with a friend who had a foal, and she let the mom wean. So the foal was 8 months old. He'd grown up with her whole herd. She had a little herd, mostly Dartmoor ponies and some Morgans. And so he had older colts to play with, an older mare, another mare who was sort of like auntie to him. And when mom decided it was time to wean, and the foal, the little colt tiger, decided he was probably ready to be weaned, but my friend figured she needed to complete the process by moving the mare to my farm. And she apologized profusely in advance. She said, "Lynn, I know it's going to be heartbreaking. You're going to hear her screaming and crying for her foal. And I hate to inflict this on you. Are you sure you want to do this?" I'm like, "We'll do it." So she brings the mare here. The mare steps off the trailer, looks around like, I've been here before. Yeah, water tank's there. My stall's there. So what's the plan today, Lynn? Not one peep out of her. Meanwhile, back at the farm, foal went to his auntie, said, "Can I nurse?" And she said, "Okay." She assumed the position, let him try. No milk there. Never mind. I'll just go play with the boys. And off he went to play with the older geldings. End of weaning. No stress. And that's the thing. As long as people accept that weaning is stressful, they're going to continue to make it stressful. And it doesn't have to be. And I'm really, really intrigued that you can actually see the difference in the colts weaned 4 months versus 6 months.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, generally, yeah. I'm not going to say there isn't a 4-month-old exception and a 6, but there's a definite general pattern there. Yes, ma'am.
Wow. Yep. And I think that's something that people, people like in your position where you see those differences, and now there's a scientific background that supports that, that explains the reason behind that. I mean, we just need to get the word out to people, give them those extra few months, and then the rest of their lives are going to be easier to deal with.
So you mentioned yacht. So I'm going to bring in Piaget here, who I believe did a lot of studying of the play circuitry and all. Are you familiar with his stuff?
Not really.
So basically, what he deduced was that the play circuitry was far more important developmentally than we tended to give it credit for, and it was also the basis for morality. And we even see morality shown in different animal sets. And so what I mean by that, like, is if you put two rats that are of different ages together to play, the bigger rat would win every time. But the bigger rat learns that unless they let the smaller rat win at least a third of the time, the smaller rat won't want to play anymore. And so they kind of self-establish some rules of boundaries for play so that the play will continue. And of course they don't have that organization in their head to give it words like I've just given it, but it's basically the establishment of morality. And even if you watch small children play on the playground, they can start a game and a new kid can come in who doesn't know the game, doesn't know the rules. They will join the game, play happily for 2 hours. They'll come out of there smelling like a little puppy dog, panting and everything, wanting one of those popsicles we were talking about earlier. And at the end of it, they can't tell you what the rules to the game were, what the name of the kids that they played with were, but for 2 hours they were out there having a blast, and intuitively they were able to join in the game, learn what the rules were, and get along and cooperate with the other kids. So this is one of those things with that feral or spoiled question earlier. To me, clearly, the most difficult horses to deal with are the ones that were not ever raised in a herd situation. So the orphaned foal type scenario, or the person that just has one mare that has this foal, because that foal never plays with other horses. It never learns herd dynamics. It never fits into a hierarchy, which I'm going to get into with you here in a minute. And that entire structure that should be naturally in their development is missing. And so if you're used to working with horses that act like horses, and then you go to work with one of these horses that's missing this huge chunk of its development, it is like it might as well be a giraffe. It's a whole different animal.
Yeah. And Pansep said the same thing about play, that the importance of play is hugely underrated. Probably in horses, dogs, and people. Yeah, and I think for exactly, you explained it really well. Play is part of how you learn to get along in a social group. And kids who don't get to do it don't develop the skills, and horses who don't get to do it don't develop the skills. But and one of the other things that is interesting about if you just have the foal raised only by the mare and nobody else, traditionally mares don't spend a lot of time playing, because in a wild herd, she's got to eat. She's either pregnant or nursing, or both, and so she's spending her time eating. It's actually the band stallion who spends more time playing with the youngsters, and then he does exactly what you said. He scales back depending on the size and ability of the youngster he's playing with. And then this is how, especially the colts, learn how to become grown-ups. They learn from the interactions with the band stallion. And in a domestic setting, they have older geldings fill the same role very nicely, and a lot of them seem to really enjoy having that role.
Kind of wonder, this just makes me curious, and I don't have an answer for it, but sometimes I keep where we're at here, we've got about 45 acres, and I do keep most of the horses out in a herd. So if I don't keep horses up in stalls or anything unless I have a very specific reason why I have to do that. I try to let them be horses as many hours of the day as possible. And I've definitely had some geldings through the years that it's almost like their inner child is still at play. They may be in their 20s and they'll still be, playing and goofing off. And for whatever reason, I don't seem to notice that as much in mares. So that's just a little connection I'm kind of making on the fly here as we're talking, but I'm going to start paying a little more. And most of the mares here aren't bred, but I just wonder if that's boys are more playful than the girls, or more overtly. They're the ones you're going to see rearing up and pawing at one another and all that stuff. And when the girls are kicking at you, they're serious about it. they're not
yeah,
playing.
I think that sums it up rather nicely. And that is one of the aspects of play in general, that the boys are more likely to play on into adulthood. And that's why they're the ones who play with the youngsters. And a lot of it in horses, a lot of that play is mock among the boys is mock fights.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'll often see pictures on the internet like stallions fighting. And you look at them and it's like you want to laugh because these horses are not fighting. These horses are playing. They're having a blast. They're each of them being careful not to hurt each other because then your playmate won't play with you anymore. You need to stick by the rules. But but the boys are more likely to play. They're also, if you watch, I was doing an article on emotions, and I asked my internet crowd if people could share with me pictures of horses playing. And I got lots of really fun pictures of geldings playing. Not one picture of a mare playing. Not one. And and so that fits that dynamic. The main thing that young mares do, that fillies will do, they're more likely to play social games, like let's go together, let's trot together. They're not doing the body contact stuff that the boys do. And you probably, even if you you guys don't have your guys in the barn, but in the barn where my bronze grew up, and the horses were always in the barn. I mean, that was kind of the default. And there was a lot of back and forth across the stalls, what I call nippy tag, nip the horse next to you on the face and then he nips you back, and a lot of that body contact sort of thing going on.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am. Well, I don't know if you want to get into this or not. We have kind of peripherally touched on it, but I was going to get into dominance theory with you, and there's kind of a new notion that's becoming more and more prevalent that dominance theory has been debunked, and it is not the way we should approach things, and there's nothing to it, and so forth. Is that a hot potato that you want to play with, or would you rather move to something else?
Hey, I'm brave. I'm game.
Okay.
And I think, like so many things with horses, it's not that black and white. There is dominance. There is stuff that happens there, but it's not. I think, talk about anthropomorphizing. I think this is a place that people anthropomorphize hugely when they think that horses want to be dominant. It's not something horses worry about. They want to feel safe. They're social animals, they're prey animals. They want to feel safe. There's no value to being in a say a wild herd. They have ranks, and rank is not the same thing as dominance. So in a wild herd, you see people will say, "Oh, here's the lead stallion." The stallions don't lead. In a wild herd, the leader is whichever horse happens to be going first in line. And the leadership in a wild herd is sometimes defined as distributed, because any horse can really decide to go anywhere, and she does not have the authority to make anybody go with her. So you have a group of horses out there grazing, and somebody decides she needs to go get a drink, which is probably one of the lactating mares. Need to go get a drink. So she heads off to wherever the water source is. And the other horses can follow or not. If they don't, probably she won't go. She'll probably wait for somebody else to go. The older and wiser that mare is, the more likely others will follow. The yearling filly decides she's going to go off someplace, probably nobody's going to be following her. And in fact, the stallion might go bring her back. So the only horses who have the authority to make another horse do something are the parents, essentially, where the mom can say to the foal, "You're not allowed to go there, you need to come back," or the stallion will say to the little play group, like, "You guys have wandered far enough from the rest of the crowd, you need to come back now." But mostly what people think of as rank is horses telling somebody to get out of my space. So this is the way it works in the wild. And there's not a whole lot of aggression. If somebody comes into somebody else's space, you're entitled to say, "Get out of my space." If that horse outranks you, then you might just say, "Never mind, I'll leave." So what we see in domestic groups is started with those flawed studies of domestic animals. So if you take a group of horses and you put a bunch of horses who are not related to each other, because in the wild, basically a band is a family unit. So a lot of the rankings just go by age. Domestically, take a group of horses who don't know each other. So you pasture them together. And unlike you, most people don't have the 45 acres for horses to really spread out and be comfortable with their space. A lot of people are keeping horses in smaller spaces. So we have horses who don't know each other. They're kept in a relatively confined space. Then you put in the hay. And then you probably have some horses who are not well socialized, like the horses you talked about earlier, who didn't get that socializing learning from other horses as they were growing up. And so they don't know the protocols of saying, can I share your hay pile? And taking no for an answer or knowing when the answer is yes. So this is when you see the dominance hierarchy, is when you have the resource guarding and the anxious, the horses who are anxious about their own safety because they don't have the social skills to know how to get along with the other horses. So this is why dominance theory, I think, stuck around for so long. People look out at the horses in the paddock and go, well, you can't tell me there's not a dominance hierarchy. But it's really a resource guarding hierarchy. It's not, and the horse who looks like the leader is usually the one who's just strongest about guarding the resources. It does not make that horse a leader that everybody else would follow if they were all turned out in the wild.
So I have maybe a little different take on that. To me, the new part of the conversation is the resource guarding aspect of it. To me, I view, like, when I've dealt with some wild horses and all too, I didn't find them to be very gentle. I've noticed when I look at wild horses, all of them have a lot of scars on them, mares and stallions alike, from bite marks and things like that throughout their time on the range. I did a lot of decoding of horse body language years ago, and I actually had a computer die that had the whole list and everything on it, and I lost it forever. This was before the cloud and all of that good stuff. But I had 3 or 4 things down that I could identify as clear body language signs of affection. So things like the mutual grooming, where they would bite each other on the withers, and then some other things that were specific to mares and foals. But I had 19 or 20 signs of aggression or threat, essentially. So we would all know, like, the pinned ears, and then you could cock in legs, and there were far more signs of aggression or threat within the horse's body language repertoire than there were of affection or getting along. And to me, that is, it's pretty clear evidence of how encoded in them that hierarchy is. And like I've always used the example, if you don't believe in that there's dominance and hierarchy among horses, we'll put one bucket of feed in an arena and put 10 horses in there and come back tomorrow, and we'll see if they have the same amount of hair on them that they had when we left them in here. And so that does bring the resources into the picture. To me, all the resources exemplifies is a changing of degree of motivation. So we could also have other areas when they might fight. Could be breeding season, hormones are in there, so that could be for the stallions or the mares. Mares get a lot more aggressive when they're in heat and so forth. If they have a foal, then a mare who's mid-level in the hierarchy may act like she's number 3 or something instead. She's going to be a lot more protective and aggressive with other horses that might come in there and make that foal feel threatened. And to my mind, it's the opposite of what we're being told right now. The resource, or the idea that resource guarding is artificial, is backwards. A scenario in which there aren't challenges for resources is the actual artificial one. If we're talking about wild horses, then resources can very commonly be a problem. So I'll give an example of this. There was a man named Mr. Borba who had he documented all of this on Facebook some years back with a group of wild horses. Another aspect I like to bring in here with wild horses, and this particular stallion was the one. There was some documentary that had been done by, I believe, an animal rights type group, and to their credit, they actually included this in the documentary, but this stallion came in, took over a band of mares, chased the other stallion off, and what would be shocking to many people is one of the first things he did was kill two of the foals, young babies, and he grabbed them by the neck, and I mean, he killed them. The same sort of behavior that a lion might do if he took over a pride, and people would not ever attribute that type of aggression to a horse, but they in fact documented this and everything. That band got caught up and then was re-released on a parcel that this man owned water rights on. And they wanted, this is BLM land, but he had the water rights to this part. They wanted the horses to travel 20 miles to a water source that was off of his deeded ground, and where they had essentially control of the horses over there. And they would not allow him to pump water to water the horses. So he's documenting this day after day, going out here, and the horses will not leave. And of course they're fighting, because this is now a life and death scenario. So we're getting into the resource guarding aspect of it. He actually winds up, now these are completely wild Mustangs. None of them are halts broke, have never had any interaction other than the time they were pinned up. He is able to go out there with a few panels and his stock trailer, back right up to the horses and load them in his stock trailer by himself. He brings them up to his ranch, puts them in the pens to give them hay and water, and the animal rights group calls the sheriff on him. The sheriff comes out there and threatens him with arrest if he doesn't return the horses to the area. They won't let him pump water. I forgot that in the first part of the story. So even though he owns the water rights and he's willing to pump water for the horses, they won't let him because they want the horses to go 20 miles to this other water source. And in the end, all of the horses wind up dying because they don't go the 20 miles. They won't let him pump the water, and they all die right there on the place. And I thought, first of all, that was a terrible example of stewardship of horses and the overreach of well-meaning and non-knowledgeable people in the stewardship of these horses. But in terms of what resources really mean to horses, I thought it was, or it is, a much more realistic example than the artificial world that we tend to put them in, where we have this, people will complain if the water trough isn't clean enough. You need to dump that out and clean it, right? And that's our world that we're bringing horses into. It isn't the world that horses are native to in reality. And so I think we tend to look at a lot of those scenarios with regard to resources backwards. The notion that resources aren't precious and aren't to be guarded and don't change the horse's behavior is the artificial notion. And in their native or natural settings, resources are a constant problem. And I think that's one of the reasons, when I've observed wild horses, I don't see a gentle nature in them as a lot of people. It's kind of a constantly revolving hornet's nest. I've yet to see one that didn't have tons of scars on it and so forth. So anyway, I'm rambling at this point, but that's been more my.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to look at this, but the environment you're describing is unusual, and there was some human manipulation there in terms of the water availability. In most places, the resources horses need are food and water, right? Well, mostly when the food is scarce, they just spread out and graze or forage further apart. So they don't have to fight over that. And most often water sources are going to be things like creeks or rivers. And there's no need to fight over those either, because you just spread out along the creek bank, or you wait your turn to wade into the ford and get the drink. So I think that anytime the resources are limited, that is artificial in the sense that that's not the way that horses normally live. That's not a typical environment for horses. In most places where researchers have observed horses, and when researchers observe, and of course, everybody's got their own personal and cultural biases as they observe horses. But there's free roaming horses all over the world. There's there's horses on Sable Island up in Nova Scotia, in the Camargue living in the marshes, in the Namibian desert, on Assateague Island, and all the barrier islands along the Atlantic coast. And so there's horses in lots of different places, in lots of different countries. Japan has free roaming horses, and so does Korea, and they protect theirs very carefully. Anyway, so observers from all different cultures and all different backgrounds have observed horses, and the general observation is that horse bands survive on cooperation, not on competition, because if you're competing with each other, then you're wasting resources fighting that you could be using for survival. And so, mares are going to have scars if they're protecting their foals. So you get a marauding band of bachelor stallions coming in, and they think they're going to mate the yearling filly, and that filly's mama may have something to say about that, and she and the bachelor may both end up with scars over that. But it's either self-defense or it's defense of the baby or the youngster. So a lot of the fights are, from the horse's point of view, self-defense, defending their personal space, their own safety, or defending the baby. Of course, the stallions, like you said about the stallion coming in and stealing the mares, it happens. But overall, when the bands are living together, in general, peaceful stallions, ones who don't go looking for fights, their bands actually have more foals and healthier foals. And their mares are more likely to be loyal and stay with them, even if they have the opportunity to go off with another stallion. They may get herded off by another stallion and sneak back to the first one that they're loyal to. One of the really intriguing things that I found when I was looking at the different studies of free roaming horses in different countries is that by most reports, American Mustangs were the most aggressive, that there were the most aggressive behaviors compared to bonding behaviors or what they call affiliative behaviors. There's more agonistic behavior seen among American Mustangs than among other groups of horses. So that may somewhat skew the view that people have here. My husband spent a lot of time on Assateague Island taking photographs of the Assateague ponies that lived there. They're free roaming there. He couldn't find any excitement at all. There were no fights. There was no chasing. There was and occasionally people do catch things like that. But for the most part, it's exactly what the researchers have seen in most feral bands, and that is there's more affiliative behaviors than agonistic, and the agonistic behaviors are almost always defense of self or defense of somebody else that you feel responsible for.
So this would be not to be just trying to argue with you here, but like when I hear you say that most behaviors are defensive, I could agree that half of behaviors are defensive, but there was an aggressor that caused party A caused party B to feel defensive, and so party A, there had to be an aggressor in order for the defender. So I could agree on a 50-50 split there.
Gotcha. And that's a good point. And if you look at it like, say, that marauding bachelor was aggressive, from his point of view, he was probably just trying to sneak a mating while nobody was looking, and that's naturally what his body tells him to do. Yeah, and sometimes it's not even an attempt to be aggressive. I saw a video of a mare defending her foal, newborn foal, and mama just naturally doesn't want anybody bothering her baby the first couple of days, and there's a troop of youngsters around who are all curious, and she's chasing them all off. They're not trying to be mean. She got aggressive. The other horses weren't trying to be aggressive. They were just super curious and really needed to have it explained to them that you don't come up and play with a new baby until mama says it's okay.
Yeah, how they learn to read the social cues and that this is serious and that is more of a threat or less of a threat.
Right.
So my contention on this would be that dominance is one of those words where the connotation and the denotation have split, as it does with so many words in our new vernacular. I think when people hear the word dominance, they're thinking what always comes to mind for me is like professional wrestler ripping their shirt off and just kind of. To me, dominance can simply be boiled down to whichever one can move the other one's feet. If I can pin my ears at you and you will take 2 steps away and get further out of my bubble, then that is a simple act of dominance. And to me, when I'm watching people work horses, there tends to be this feeling that dominance is a dirty word, and so we kind of invent new ways to describe as though dominance isn't at play when it in fact is. I mean, for me, even positive reinforcement, that community would very much look down upon any sort of dominance behavior. But to me, withholding food in order to manipulate an animal to do what you want or use that as a coercion, it's still coercion. We're still ultimately manipulating that animal to move their feet how we want or to do whatever behavior. And so it is still a display of dominance. It just isn't ripping a shirt off or hitting them with a baseball bat with spikes driven through it or whatever we may be thinking of when we hear the word dominance, but it is still clearly to me an act of dominance. And I don't feel like we should be apologetic for that. To me, dominance is merely a natural fact. It's like saying that gravity is good or bad. I mean, gravity merely exists and you just have to deal with it. You could deny its existence, but you're not going to float off the planet because you cease to believe that gravity is real. You are in a dominance hierarchy, whether you want to acknowledge it or not, is kind of how I view it anyway. I don't think it needs to be a dirty word.
No, it actually scientifically it's not. But scientifically, the way it's used is it refers to the resource guarding, which horse is best at getting the upper hoof, so to speak, so that if there's limited resources, he's able to push the other horses away. And my husband's first mare, the Palamino, she had a huge issue with food. We know I found out her history, and she lived for a while at a boarding stable before us, where feeding time was a free for all, and she was forever food aggressive, and I mean dangerously food aggressive. She would mow you down to get to the food, and it took us a long time to work through that. And she made sure all the other horses knew they were not to come near her when she was eating. And that is what scientifically is called dominance. What you're talking about, and you're using dominance in the sort of the common usage term, but scientifically that's called rank. And it says that you outrank the other individual, so you are entitled to have more authority, particularly over your personal space. But as humans, we're responsible for the horses. We can't give them the same latitude that they give each other in a free roaming herd because we're responsible for everybody's safety. So I don't feel like I need to go be dominant over any horse, because the human idea of dominance goes with authority and respect and all these are very human. Talk about anthropomorphizing. That's way into it. All I need is to outrank the horse enough to say, if he says, I really don't feel like I need to do that, and I think he does, no choices this time, I can say, yes, you really need to. But I'm not gaining that based on him being afraid of me or recognizing that I have more power. It's more because he trusts me. So let's see, back to rank. Rank is still an individual. Goes around because the other misconception about dominance is that there's this hierarchy, and horses are always wanting to move up to the higher part of the hierarchy. And rank is not a hierarchy. In fact, we've had a circular ranking at our barn for a long time. My gelding bronze outranked my husband's younger mare, Shiloh. Shiloh outranks Brandy, and Brandy outranked Bronze. And that's not unusual. I've talked to lots of people who've seen that same kind of circular ranking. So a ranking is not like a linear hierarchy. A ranking is between two individuals. And that's some of the difference between technically a rank and dominance.
So I would actually argue, like, I feel like that's a misperception. It's kind of always this, whenever two different sides are arguing, you kind of have to agree on terms, because there's a tendency to, I'm going to take the worst part of your argument and compare it to the best part of mine. I would not say, for those of us on the dominance theory side, that there was ever an assertion that hierarchies are absolutely linear. I think that's a false claim, that there was always a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think there is a general aspect of that is true, but if I'm going to be a person that says, and I agree with you, I don't think I have to seriously outrank this horse, but I do think I have to be able to exhibit some authority on the horse in order to have an effect, whether that's overt or less blunt force trauma to the head. But I do think that if I believe that I can do that work with this horse, then I also am implicitly acknowledging that I believe there to be fluidity to that hierarchy. Otherwise, I wouldn't believe that I could influence it. And so I've never thought that argument against dominance theory held any water. Nobody on this side of it is actually claiming that there is that rigidity.
I've heard that claim. No, I've heard that claim made many times.
Well, I would wholeheartedly disagree with those people. And again, I think that it's implicit. If you believe the hierarchy to be important and true, and leadership and dominance all to be at play, then you can't also believe that it's not fluid, because if it weren't fluid, you wouldn't have any prayer on influencing it. Like that has to be an implicit understanding that's self-evident to me, anyway.
So I think if we look at what's the real question here, the real question is, how do we safely? I mean, how do we handle a horse in a way that he's reliably safe? And that's our bottom line. That's what we say. We want to teach him to do a job and be safe and reliable doing it. That's what we're aiming for, right? Mm-hmm. So, and the horse's goal is to feel safe. Their goal, and this is my biggest complaint about the dominance hierarchy. And in the end, the question of a dominance hierarchy is really academic. What matters to me is, how do you treat the horse? We could argue dominance hierarchy all day, but it's what happens when we go out and we're with a horse. And do we take the view of, I need to make this horse do exactly what I say, and he's got to do it now, and if he doesn't do it now, there's going to be an unpleasant consequence. That to me is dominance, and that is not acknowledging that the horse's behavior has a whole lot of emotion behind it. All behavior is prompted by emotion. I mean, it took me a while to get my head around that.
I wouldn't disagree with that at all.
Okay, good. So you're already there. So the important thing to me is the horse needs to feel safe. If the horse feels safe with me, because horses are basically cooperative, they don't care who ranks where as much as they care, am I safe with you? So when a horse feels safe with me, then he doesn't have a whole lot of reason not to go along with my plans. And then we don't have to have a lot of argument. And the more often he feels safe with me, the safer he feels with me, the more readily, when I say, yeah, I know you don't want to do this, but you have to do it anyway, the more likely he is to say, well, Lynn, you haven't steered me wrong before, and I know you look out for me, so I'm going to trust you on this one.
So, yeah, I would completely agree with that. One thing I would take a little bit of exception to, and you didn't say this directly, but again, I think it's a little bit implied. I I certainly wouldn't be claiming. I guess I can't speak for everybody on the dominance theory side of things, but I don't hear among this group, and I don't believe myself, that all horses are trying to be dominant. I think there's maybe 5% that have a natural alpha in them, and there's going to be that contention with those horses largely. But most of them, I think, are happy to be a follower, not a leader. I think there are some that are more natural leaders, more natural alpha kind of mentalities. And oddly, I have found, so here's one of those things you could pick apart about me. I very much believe that dominance theory, at least what I would say is the core of dominance theory, and I think always has been, not these other assertions that I hear attributed to it that I don't think were ever really a part of it. Maybe some fringe people had that. I don't think, and I don't think most people think, that all horses are trying to be the leader. I think most of them are most uncomfortable if you put them in that position. And I believe that's you have this notion of protector leadership, which we'll get into in just a minute. But I think there kind of always has to be a leader. And so if you're not providing that and there's a vacuum, then there are a good number of horses that will try to fulfill that role, but they're not necessarily challenging you for it. If you would take it instead and there wasn't a vacuum, they would be perfectly happy. Here's where there's maybe some hypocrisy, is that I have also noticed a pretty strong pattern of horses that are very dominant with other horses often handle submissive or novice riders quite well. And you would think there would be that challenge, but a lot of times that alpha horse in the herd is the horse you can put your 4-year-old kid on and everything will be fine. And the more submissive horse in the herd is the one that your kid might not do well around, because there would be more of that fighting for leadership situation with that weaker horse. That's not always there, but I've seen a pretty consistent pattern. A lot of surprising, like with therapeutic riding horses, I've seen some very dominant therapeutic riding horses that were phenomenal at their job with these riders that, had no ability to control them or anything, but the horse filled in for the person in that case. So.
Well, I think you, a few minutes ago, you mentioned something that is another one of those pet peeves of mine, and that is, if we don't give a horse clear direction, then you can't blame him for saying, well, if you don't know what you're doing, then I'll take charge. And then so many people say, well, the horse is taking advantage of me. No, you did not give clear direction. You didn't make it possible for the horse to do what you want to do because she doesn't know, or she's not comfortable doing it, or you never taught her what you wanted, or, in that case, people often feel like the horse is taking advantage when in fact the horse is just saying, hey, I'm not getting clear direction, so I'm making my best guess here. And then there's the horses like my husband's Palamino mare, who she was one of those that with other horses, she looked very dominant because of the food aggression. But put a little kid on her back, she never put a foot wrong. She was the one we always popped little kids on for pictures and pony rides. And she was great, and she would not listen to anything the kids said. They never learned to ride on her because she only ever listened to the person on the lead line. But if you were an adult and you acted like you knew what you're doing and you didn't, her attitude was like, you don't know what you're doing. I'm not taking orders from you. and she put a couple of people in their place when they thought they knew what they were doing. My husband, on the other hand, respected the fact that she was a savvy old trail horse and he was a relatively inexperienced rider, and he trusted her and she looked out for him. So yeah, I think what that really tells us is these relationships can be so complex, really complex, and that the horse's ability to get along in a herd doesn't necessarily reflect their ability to get along with people. My bronze was wonderful with people. So many people loved him. He was a favorite with vets, with everybody who came here. With other horses, he had no social skills. He created, and we didn't even realize how much till after he was gone, but he created a lot of anxiety in other horses that he was turned out with. And it was just because of what we talked about earlier. He didn't grow up with that mixed social group that he needed to learn the social skills from. But those skills were completely separate from his very, very gentlemanly behavior with people.
Yes, ma'am. So you've mentioned that horses are looking for safety and security multiple times. Do you get into polyvagal nerve theory and that type of stuff? Do you want to talk about that or not so much?
No, I look at it more. I mean, I think there's a lot of validity to that. I tend to just look at it more like, where's my horse's emotional state? So I'm looking at, is it positive or negative? And the more I learn, the more it's like okay, positive. Now, which positive emotion is going on here? Is this play or is this curiosity? For instance, but for the most part, I think what most people need to just look at is, do we have positive or negative emotion going on here? Because that's our predictor of what's going to happen next.
So would you say that when you're saying positive or negative emotion, does that correlate with parasympathetic or sympathetic nervous system? Or are you saying something besides that?
No. I'd say that's pretty much Concept's view of the 7 core emotions really has resonated for me. So that's why that's sort of the angle from which I approach it. But it still fits into the same sympathetic, parasympathetic, polyvagal. It all fits together.
And then you have also mentioned trust a few times, and I kind of wanted to just bring this up or toss this into your lap. I find trust to be more of a byproduct of other things that we do. So I don't think there aren't really opportunities to directly work on a trust bond with a horse. To me, it's the indirect, it's kind of the fruit born of the tree you plant, but you can't really directly work on that. It is more an indirect consequence. So what are your thoughts on trust?
Absolutely. And I think there's a subtle but important distinction between trust and a bond. In terms of the core emotions, a bond is the core emotion care, and it means a strong affiliation or connection with an individual. As a trainer who has multiple horses to work with, you don't have to bond with every horse, but they do have to trust you. So the trust is a prerequisite for a bond. And when a horse trusts one person, they usually transfer that to somebody, to others, if that's been their experience. So for instance, when I got my Arab bronze, he came from a breeder who was very much a protector leader. He had a whole bunch of horses, and the horses all knew they could trust him implicitly. And so Bronze just automatically transferred that to me. All I had to do was not blow it, because as far as Bronze knew, people were trustworthy. When I got Brandy, she had no reason to think that people were trustworthy. That I had to earn. And amazingly, it happened pretty quickly, but I did have to earn it. And we earn it by showing the horse he's safe with us. And this is where I think my experience is very different than what some people believe. I don't earn trust by showing the horse I can make him move, by showing him that I'm in control of him. I earn trust by showing him that he's safe with me. And part of that safety means I'm still working with an animal who's a whole lot bigger than 915 pounds. So safety means I have to feel safe too. So we set the limits, we set the rules, I teach them what I want them to do, but I do all that fairly. And when you're fair, horses are much more willing to follow your rules. And I want to set them up to understand my rules without scaring them. So go ahead. I see you're thinking.
I was just going to, so my experience, and I come at this mostly, I have more dealt with young colts that had hardly any prior experience with people, or problem horses who didn't have good experiences with people. So honestly, my general take on it is that trust often isn't transferable. I will commonly, I've got several horses here that I can ride, but nobody else can. So where if I feel like that's almost a part of seasoning. So I've had a lot of let's say I ride this horse for a few months and I get him started. He wasn't never had a saddle on or anything before we started, or even a lot of them aren't halter broke, and get him going. I could ride that horse 60 days, 9 days, whatever, and I could get on him and demonstrate to the owner all the things that I can do with this animal. He'll follow me around at liberty and all that good stuff. And then the owner could come in to ride right after I've demonstrated all of that, and they are in no way, shape, or form going to start where I just ended, because that horse doesn't have the same trust in them and so forth. So I look at that as building rapport. That person kind of has to build rapport. I've seen a lot of instances where, and again, we're talking about with green horses that don't have 8 years of handling and all, but they can get on that horse and within 30 seconds have him braced up and not trusting them and totally in the sympathetic nervous system, and it can go sideways on you pretty quick. I think if we had a pattern of 5 different people that all knew enough and handled the horse well, and now there's a pattern of multiple people handled me and all at a level that I felt safe, and I saw them coming, and then that horse will become more and more secure. But the one person horse transferring trust to another person, I've seen a lot of instances where that it didn't work out that way. It's easily mess upable. Let me put it that way.
But how much of that do you think was that you were giving clear signals and the horse understood your clear signals? The owner gets on unless they have your same skills and your same technique, they're not giving the same clear signals.
Sure. No, I completely agree that that's what's going on. But what I'm saying is that the horse it will not blindly trust them long into that zone. That person has, a limited amount of time to show that horse that they're on board with this and that they're trustworthy as well. Or that horse is going to go, oh, whoa, hold on. What are you doing here? This is not the way, and you could trigger that sympathetic nervous system response pretty quickly in them, unless they've got 8 years of that, where there's a very long established pattern of behavior with humans, and they're really no longer worried with it, I guess. So if trust is new, it's more fragile, is the way I would think about it.
And the part that's resonating for me is the clarity. It's hard for a horse if part of a horse's trust for a horse means he wants to feel secure with you. If you're on his back and you're not giving him clear signals, he's going to feel pretty insecure. So it could be that if another experienced rider got on the horse, was able to give clear signals, comfortable to the horse, and adjust to the horse. And this is the other part of horsemanship that a lot of people don't get. And I got it. I mean, when I was a kid, I was sorry that I wasn't able to have my own horse. But looking back, the best thing that could have happened for me was working for this horse dealer, where I had to ride all kinds of different horses, and I had to adjust to all kinds of different horses. And if somebody could get on one of those horses you trained, adjust to that horse, read that horse's feedback. And this may be the other piece of it. It's like what I'm saying is the trust it may be willing to be there, but maybe these people are blowing it right off the bat because the horse gives them some feedback that you would have read, and you would have said to the horse, yeah, I did ask you to do this, or no, I did not ask you to do that. And the other person doesn't read the horse's body language coming back. So their cues don't make sense or are counterproductive or confusing. So I'm just wondering how much of that trust is just getting blown right off the bat.
Oh no, I completely agree with you. Yes, that's okay. What the timing. I think timing is a big one. You have a limited window to respond, and if you're not reading it correctly or accurately or quickly, and then that window can pass you by, and now the horse is wandering, and you become less trustworthy pretty quickly. And it doesn't take long,
No.
it can be seconds. And
the other piece of it is, if you correct a horse for something when he knows he's done it right, or he thinks he's done it right, then you blow that real fast.
yes, ma'am. Well, before I forget, I should probably jump to our sponsor of this episode and make sure that we get the bills paid. So our sponsor for this episode is Stick Chap. Is 2 wrinkles and a noseband the only way to go for you and your stick? Would you not be caught dead riding your barrel horse without bit guards? Is white foam a badge of honor separating the legit from the phonies in your worldview of the ponies? We've even heard of some dumb dads asking their daughters if all that white stuff around the horse's mouth was an attempt to glue it shut with Elmer's. They just don't understand what it takes to properly care for our broncs. If you understand, then you're likely a very virtue signaling equestrian who wouldn't be caught dead not spending all you can to take care of your equine soulmate. You wouldn't face the harsher winters of global warming without protecting your lips. Why should they? Stick Chap has your back. Made with beeswax from Ernie's Vermont bees, hyaluronic acid, carnauba, coconut oil, and a touch of peyote, and a few shavings from the cocobola tree. Stick Wax is the perfect blend of waxes and oils to help that skin turn from blue to pink again. Through the infusion of essential oils, we've got peppermint, eucalyptus, turmeric, and lavender scents to choose from. If your horse has a particularly busy mouth, we're currently working on a lidocaine-infused version so that his mouth will be so numb he won't be gumming on that bit like some toothless hillbilly grandpa trying to get that last crumb of tobacco-infused cornbread out of his cheek. We all know the lips of the horse have it rough. They've got the harsh fibers of haze and forages to endure prolonged exposure to lathering, chafing and loss of circulation from drop nose bands, acne from the sugars of marshmallow cream, and much more to deal with. Don't give that oh-so-kissable snout any reason to pout. Preserve that soft skin with Stick Chap. With our turmeric offering, you can even turn the frown to brown. Stick Chap, protecting the lips of our sticks since 2018. Okay, so we've got the bills paid now. I feel a little better about this one.
You do that with a straight face.
If the guest starts chuckling and I hear it, I lose it. So thank you
that's why I was covering my face, trying to hide that you were cracking me up.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your book, What Horses Really Want. So I have to ask the obvious question, what do horses really want? Lynn?
They want to feel safe, but I think they also get easily bored. So I think one of my friends who is kind of a whiz at taking wild ponies and turning them into solid citizens, she says, the first thing I do is give them a job. And I think what horses want is that when we have a connection with them, that they can feel confident that we've got their back. Are we looking out for them? So, and sometimes people would misinterpret this as like, oh, I want to coddle them and save them from never having to be stressed. Well, life is stressful. It happens. There's no way we can save them from that. What I want is I don't want to be the source of the stress. So I want to be the good guy who's supporting them when they're stressed. So, for instance, when the vet comes and the horse is going like, oh, this is the lady who pokes me with the needles. I really don't want to. I'm not going to scold him. I'm going to give him a few minutes. Calm down, relax, get yourself emotionally ready. Okay. And there's a cookie coming after you get the shot. And my vet, all of our healthcare practitioners love my horses. They say they're the easiest they have to deal with. One of the things that people have a lot of trouble with horses is anxiety about new things, spookiness. And many people make that worse by when a horse goes into a spooky situation or a situation where they get spooky. So you're riding down the trail and all of a sudden there's a trash bag in front of you. And the horse goes, egads, looks like there could be a monster there hiding behind that trash bag. And then the person says, well, you've got to go past it anyway. And this is where I want to turn this into, horse, I'm looking out for you. And I'm trusting that you're looking out for me. So let's look at this trash bag for a while and let you figure out that there's nothing to be scared of. So instead of pushing, which would, get all the cortisol going, the cortisol's already going, but I don't need to get it any higher. What I want is to engage curiosity and encourage the horse to check things out. And curiosity is huge. It's a really powerful positive emotion, but it's also a learning experience. So it's one of the ways that we can help horses discover the world, feel safer in the world. It's something that a lot of foals miss because they don't have the wide open scope. You've got 45 acres. If you had foals turned loose there, they're probably running, scampering all over the place, checking out the whole world, sticking their noses in places and having a lot of fun. Foals that grow up in more limited environments don't get a chance to do that. One of the things that horses want to know that we're listening to them. And when the horse says, I'm scared, if I say, tough luck, you have to do what I said anyway, every time he's scared, it's like, I can't count on her to look out for me. All she wants is for me to just be obedient. So when he's scared, I help him find out that there was nothing to be scared of in the first place. So the more often horses explore things, and they do generalize information, that's been one of those things that's been argued in the research, but they do generalize information. So you let them explore, and the more they explore, this is kind of like remedial training from the foals that didn't have much scope. The more they explore, the more they learn, and then the more they start thinking, gee, there's something really strange up there, but Lynn says we should explore these things, and usually turns out like everything's okay. And then we go from, oops, spooky, to more curiosity. And then when I have to say, I'm sorry, you're spooked at this, but this is the judge's stand. We don't get to stand around and look at this. You're just going to trot straight past it. And then the horse's response is, well, she usually lets me look. So if she's saying no, she must have a good reason. So, okay, off we go.
I think this is one of those sayings I really like that I feel like helps give the right perspective to what we would commonly call desensitizing. I think it brings the curiosity into the picture. So if we are working on desensitizing, what we would call desensitizing, we are not working on making the horse less scared. We are actually working on making the horse braver. And that's not the same thing. And I think the difference there is pretty key. And it changes, it gives you the right perspective on it. And speaking of perspective, you mentioned in your book that there was something that you underwent that gave you a change in perspective. So what prompted that change in how you handle horses for you?
I was desperate. I got a little mare that her last trainer, a very experienced natural horsemanship trainer, dropped her off here. And I don't know that I ever got the full story, but it became very clear when I queried him about her that he was afraid of her. He'd never ridden her outside a round pen. He said he'd absolutely never let children near her. And when I had met her, well, let me back up. So, because there was a curiosity behind this, where this started with was curiosity. I told a rescue that I would train one of their geldings for riding, so that he would be more adoptable. And as soon as he got here, I could see he was very anxious. And anxious horses are not safe horses. We don't need all that spookiness. So I thought, I'm going to try an experiment. I got nothing to lose. Instead of correcting him for things like I would normally do, I'm going to try ignoring any misbehavior that's not dangerous and just praise the right stuff. And I was careful not to set him up for any misbehavior that I didn't need to. And a couple months later, as I was riding him, I started getting scared because he did everything right. He worked really hard. He met me at the pasture gate. There was no regression, no arguments. He'd actually volunteer to do stuff that I asked him to do. And I was thinking, this is too weird. Something's going to blow up. But it never did. It never did. And when prospective adopters came, it was a riding instructor, and she rode him. So did her very, very anxious mother, and so did a very bold teenager. And he adapted to all three of them with great confidence. So I was like, well, this is too easy. He must have just been a super, super smart pony. So I went back to the rescue and I said, I want a more challenging horse. So they got this horse and put her in their very large arena, turned her loose, and they couldn't catch her. 15 minutes later, I finally said, let me see what I can do. Because I've been catching horses since I was a kid, and I always do it the same way. I don't know how I learned it, but I always do. I just go stand there and I say, I'm safe. I'm not going to pressure you. I'm not going to chase you. You want to come over to me? And she did. Probably took 15, 20 minutes, but she walked over to me. And then when I walked back to the gate to chat with my husband and the director of the rescue, she followed me. So what I saw there was she wanted to trust me, but she was so petrified of any kind of pressure that it's like, yeah, I had reduced the pressure I used with the first pony, but I couldn't use any pressure with her at all. So I was like, okay, if this pony says to me she wants to trust me, I've said to her I'm trustworthy. Now what the heck am I going to do? Because I don't know what to do with her. So over the winter, while we were waiting for her to arrive, I happened to encounter a young man who was working with a pony who had been petrified, particularly of men. And I asked him to show me what he did, because this pony had gone from climbing the walls when she saw a man to following him around without a lead in a matter of months. I said, how did you do it? And he showed me. He walked up to her stall and he stood sideways to her, with the door open, and just waited for her to come over to him. And he waited maybe 3 or 4 minutes. She came over, he put the halter on, and like a dog at heel, the loop in the lead, she followed him out to the arena and followed him all over the place. I mean, if they'd been in a dog obedience match, she'd have scored great. And he turned her loose. She followed him around for a while, and then she took off. He ran around, and I thought, lapse of training. He's going to be embarrassed. I said, so what do you do now? And he said, nothing. She'll be back. She scared herself, and she came running back and plastered herself to his leg. And that's when the light bulb went on for me. He gave her the choice to leave. And that's when she came back, because she felt safe with him. I said, this is what I have to do with Brandy. So that's what I did. And over time, I was able to add pressure in. Of course, everything's pressure. You know, if we're even using our body language, there's pressure in different subtle ways. But over time, she got more and more comfortable and confident, so that I can do pretty much anything with her that I can with any other horse. But that's not where we started.
Do you view any of this through the lens of conditioning? So you mentioned earlier about that was kind of the view of the last century, was that horses only did things through conditioning. I could characterize certainly parts of this as reinforcing type behaviors. So do you view it that way at all?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. The standard view of horse training is that we need to have negative reinforcement, because as you mentioned earlier, that lends itself to touch. You know, you can't ride a horse if you aren't using some touch. And we could look at it like negative reinforcement because it's pressure release, but I don't. I think when you ride a horse well and your cues are clear and comfortable, I see that more like a dancer's cues to a partner.
Yeah. I hate, you hear this mostly from the positive reinforcement crowd, but when they refer to an aversive being used for negative reinforcement, 95% of the time I'm using any kind of pressure, aversive is way too strong of a word to describe what's actually going on there. It's not, it's pressure that can be felt, but it's not needles in the skin, or it's not really something that the horse feels a need to get away from, right? So there has to be comfort with it too, or you're going to drive them into the sympathetic nervous system, and we're out of the realm of choice and all of that stuff as
Well,
well.
and then
So,
too, you're out of the realm of learning, because as soon as you drive them into too much cortisol, they're out of the learning zone. They're in high arousal. The prefrontal cortex is not doing its best job, and learning's not happening. And the most learning they're going to do is learning what they don't want to do, or where they don't want to be, or who they don't want to be with. Yeah, I think what I tried to do in particular with Brandy was to make sure she understood what I wanted ahead of time before I used pressure to do it. For instance, I didn't work on leading her with pressure. I worked on leading her with body language, so that once she felt the pressure of the lead, she would always know what I meant for her to do. So I don't want to put too much pressure on a horse until they already know what the right answer is. Or what I mean to say is, I don't want to do anything that could be potentially scary. When a horse doesn't know what the right answer is and they feel constrained or confined, that's scary. But I want to make sure that I've set them up to understand what's the right answer. It's like what wasn't it Tom Dorrance that said, you want to set them up to figure it out and then give them time to figure it out. And I think, you raise an important point about positive reinforcement has its issues too. I don't see horse training as it's got to be all one or all the other. There's a place for both. But what's really missing is social learning and investigative behavior. Those are two really powerful learning modes that are almost never incorporated in standard horsemanship.
yeah, one thing I just want to mention, you had talked about a horse before that was very fearful. Just as kind of a factual bullet point here, you are not ever going to correct fear out of the equation. So if you've got a horse that is very, very fearful, punishment is not going to be an effective tool for you there. It's you got a gasoline and a fire situation going on. So
Yes.
Just from a totally practical aspect, that's
a good way to put it. The gasoline and the fire. It's true. You try to correct a horse who's fearful, and you're just asking for way bigger trouble.
Yeah. I am one that I kind of feel like it's necessary. I really feel a responsibility, again, because of that pendulum shift thing. I do think there is a place in the world for positive punishment. I don't think it's a tool that needs to be used by anyone at any time, but there are times and places where I think it's an appropriate thing to do, just like raising kids. There's a time where, punishment of kids for certain behaviors is a totally appropriate thing. But I think you have to have the understanding of sort of these structures and all, and what they really do mean. I know I mentioned this on the podcast a bunch of times before, but like there's a particular clip that I go back and watch just to smile every once in a while of one of the really famous clinicians who's talking about how bad it is to punish horses while punishing a horse. He's working a horse and talking about how, you should never punish a horse, but he doesn't understand what punishment is enough to recognize that that's what he's actually doing in that particular instance. And so I think kind of the semantics, again, the dominance, what is dominance really versus what do we feel about dominance? What is punishment really versus how we might feel about that word? They're not necessarily the same thing. Punishment doesn't have to involve pain or anything like that necessarily. All it means is you're making a behavior less likely to reoccur. It's as simple as that.
Well, yeah, but punishment can be treacherous. As you say, it's not something you want to use on a regular basis, because punishment also can trigger an awful lot of negative responses. Fear of the person, fear of the situation, aggression, more just more generalized fear. But there's also a time to say that we have to say to a horse, for everybody's safety, what you just did is completely unacceptable because it's not safe. And that's one where I try to use logical consequences when I can. For instance, Our Palamino mare came with the idea that when you come into the barn, you charge down the aisle to go in your stall. Well, I don't lead all my horses into the barn. They're expected to file in the barn at a walk and walk into their own stall. And when she jogged down the aisle, I could have yelled at her. I could have punished her. Instead, I would just quietly go put a halter on her, lead her back out of the barn, and then lead her down the aisle ostentatiously slowly. And so she very quickly got the idea, well, the fastest way to get to my food is walk down the aisle, because otherwise Lynn's going to make me walk back outside and walk back in super slow. And so very quickly, without ever raising her anxiety level beyond the I need my food right now, but no more fear of me, she learned that she needed to walk down the barn aisle. On the other hand, if a horse carelessly turns around and crashes into me because they're thinking about somebody else, that's a dangerous situation. And that's one where I have no hesitation about getting big and letting them know this is completely unacceptable, but I also have to measure that according to the horse. My bronze was so bold, I could stand in front of him and scream at him, and he would look at me like, oh, you're so cute when you're mad. I accidentally yelled at Brandy one time shortly after she came for 2 days. Just like, I don't think I want to let you get. So we always have to temper that with being that dog trainers like to say 1 inch tougher and no more, just so they get the point, and that's it. And Brandy now can get the point. Horses can see these things from a distance better than people think too. I opened the pasture gate one day and she was so excited that when she bolted out to pasture, she bumped me pretty hard. Of course, by then she's halfway across the pasture and I was not going to catch her or do anything to her. But I yelled at her. I was like, you are way out of line and you are in big trouble for that. So the next day, before I opened the pasture gate, I signaled Brandy. I said, I want you to walk over that way before I open the gate. She didn't even hesitate. She walked away from the gate and stood away from the gate while I opened it. It was she remembered that I had been upset with her the day before. So I didn't have to make a big in-the-moment punishment of this, but the natural consequence of, okay, you don't get to stand near the gate while I open it anymore. And she got that. And she still remembers that. I put my hand on the gate latch. She's already walking away. But I think the less often we need to use any kind of punishment, the bigger impression it makes too. People who do it all the time, you just create a fearful horse.
Yeah, I don't mean to say it should be like our go-to thing, but I also think I just think there needs to be a conversation that it is a tool and a valid tool, and it has its place just like any other tool, and it's no more or no less than that. I guess that's the way that I would go about it. Like I've seen numerous instances where this is kind of where my can you have too much empathy question came in, where someone was utterly committed to being soft with a horse, and because of that, a behavior that never should have been allowed to persist went on for 6 months when it could have been solved in 30 minutes. And then we would have been safe for 5 months and 29 days and 24 or 23 and a half hours, versus they weren't willing to step up and do the damn thing and get this over with, and then everything was so much better. So that's more the perspective I'm coming at that from.
Well, I think we're in agreement on that, because I don't see that as empathy. I see that as failure to step up to your job as the horse's protector and leader. Because part of the horse, if my horses were not well behaved, when horses are not well behaved, they don't have positive interactions with people. My horses know that, and it's funny because my horses have a whole lot of freedom. They go in and out of the barn by themselves. When I was riding Bronze, I could tack him up, turn him loose in the paddock. He'd take himself to the water tank, get himself a drink, and then meet me at the arena gate. But that comes from consistency, fairness, making sure they understand what the rules are, and not accepting. And I think consistency is something a lot of people miss. A lot of people can't be consistent with themselves. So they can't be consistent with a horse. So if you allow something one day and then punish it the next day, that's probably one of the worst things you could do. But allowing any behavior that can escalate into unsafe, I don't see that as empathy. I see that as failure to fulfill your responsibility.
This way, I agree. So one thing I do appreciate, you do have a science type background, and you did come at this book through the lens of research and more the hard answers and numbers to back it up and so forth. So when writing the book, I guess first I want to ask you, did What Horses Really Want the title? Did you have the title first and you wrote the book around that, or did that become the title as you were writing the book?
I can't take credit for the title. I had some dumb title about horses, leadership, and trust or something like that, because it started out I was going to write about how horses learn. And somebody suggested, well, really, it's also leadership is the more overarching issue. So when I sent it to the publisher, and one of the first things they said when they said, well, yes, we'll accept your book to publish, but we want to change the title. And I think they were afraid I was going to argue. I'm like, no, please change the title. I'm terrible at titles. I have no idea. And they said, well, really, this is what it's about. Is horses want to have the bond. They want to have clear communication that goes both ways. When I say bond, but they want to feel safe. They want the clear communication that goes both ways. They want to be able to explore the environment so that they don't feel anxious about every strange new thing. They don't want to feel stressed all the time, but most of all, they want to know how to cope with it when they do feel stressed. So these are the things that horses want. So my publisher said, well, that's the logical title.
I like it. It's straightforward and to the point. Were there any, as you were going through the research for this, were there any kind of surprising things that jumped out at you? Anything unexpected that you learned in the process?
Oh, tons of unexpected things. One of the ones that jumped out at me most when I made a chart of behaviors and the differences in lifestyle between domestic horses and free roaming horses. And one of the things that shocked me was how very, very much we expect horses to adapt to a domestic environment. And then, of course, that leads to how incredibly well horses have adapted to so many different domestic environments, ways of handling, and different jobs, which says, I think there's a whole lot more intelligence there than people often give them credit for. And so that is historic means of training strictly through conditioning, I think we lose, if we use that, we lose the intelligence that horses could bring to the jobs we're asking them to do. Because I think the happiest horses I've seen are the ones that understand their job and want to do it.
I completely agree. That kind of goes back to the artificial nature of resource guarding and all that stuff that I was bringing. Imagine trailers from a horse's perspective. You want me to walk into this little metal box, and then this metal box is going to move me around while I stand still. From a horse's point of view, like, that's magic. I mean, how crazy has that got to be? And we just expect that they're just going to deal with that and everything's going to be fine, and that's a normal part of.
This is one of those places where the traditional way of getting a horse into a trailer just has gotten people into so much trouble. For one thing, the trailers embody innate fears, the innate fear of walking on something that might not be solid ground, getting into an enclosed space. Horses' their night vision doesn't click in as quickly as ours does. So if it's dark inside the trailer, that's an issue. And it has all these funny sounds to it. And so if the horse then feels coerced to get in the trailer, we've got like the perfect storm. It amazes me how many horses happily get in trailers and ride along. Yay, we're going someplace where that's fine. Wherever we go, that's fine. Wherever we go afterwards, that's fine too. I was just amazing how many horses do that. But I saw one of the best ways to teach a horse to get in a trailer is the old way of, if you can safely do it, park the trailer in a paddock or a pasture, serve the food inside or as close to it as they're comfortable going, and let them get in the trailer and explore it all by themselves. It's not always safe to do that, but if it is, this is where the way that I got Brandy into a trailer, because I know she'd been found running loose, and the way that she finally they finally trapped her was to successively give her hay, get her in a pasture, then get her in a round pen, and then chase her into a trailer. So her first experience was utterly terrifying, because at that point she was so feral that she was afraid, she was terrified of people. And so I know that when her trainer delivered her to me, he used the same method to get her on the trailer to come to my place, just make himself scarier than the trailer was. And it took me probably 3 months before she would even walk near the trailer without pooping cow pies. So what I used was mostly I used the modes of learning that are not negative reinforcement. That's usually what people try and use to get a horse in a trailer. I figured that was going to be a real hopeless task with her. So we started with investigative behavior and social learning and positive reinforcement. The positive reinforcement was the hay or the treats closer and closer to the trailer. Investigative behavior was, let's walk around the trailer and look at it. Social learning was, I'm going to touch the trailer. I'm touching the trailer. I'm leaning on the trailer. I'm standing inside the trailer. Notice, Brandy, I'm still alive. This trailer is not hurting me. I'm here. I'm calm. I'm comfortable. I'm hanging out here. It's all okay. And it took a long time. Somebody who's a better trainer than I am, I'm sure, could have done it quicker. But in the end, Brandy will walk into a trailer for me, and she will do it calmly, and she will ride calmly. When I say calmly, I'll say quietly. I know she's still very anxious. But I did that by using those other modes of learning. And now I can actually use negative reinforcement. We walk up to a trailer, she'll say, I really don't want to do this, Lynn. And she just pauses. And I say, no, you don't, but I really need you to do it. So let's go. And if she doesn't walk with me, I can put a little pressure on her lead. And she can say, okay, I can do this. And she does.
So I often view things in I don't normally use the term investigative behavior, but I am trying to trigger curiosity. And the way that I view that is that I'm triggering curiosity is going to be on the parasympathetic side. So learning can take place and we're not fueled with cortisol and all of that other stuff.
Yes.
But I am typically triggering that using negative reinforcement as my shaping tool to reward the curiosity. I would do the same thing with trailer loading. So how are you, if you're specifically trying to take negative reinforcement off of the table, how do you go about trying to set
how do
up?
we use the curiosity?
Yes, ma'am. What are you doing to trigger that if you're not using?
Okay, so let's have an example. Curiosity. Pick a scenario.
Let's say crossing our classic creek.
Okay, good. So curiosity is actually the positive emotion, technically called seeking. And seeking is one of the most powerful emotions because it's what prompts all mammals to go out and find food, water, shelter, mates, everything they need to survive. So seeking is very strong, and seeking involves dopamine. So once you get the curiosity going, you don't need any negative reinforcement. You just let that dopamine go because that's an intrinsic reward. That reward is in the brain. It's more powerful because I've seen people try to use curiosity like, well, let's introduce the horse to this strange new thing, right? And so I'll walk him closer and I'll click and treat, and then we go away, and we come back and we click and treat, and we go away. Well, the horse isn't learning anything about that. He's just obeying the let's go closer. And that reward isn't anywhere near as potent as the dopamine that's in the brain when the horse is exploring. So creek is a perfect example. when I got Bronze, he was terrified of water and ditches. The boarding stable where I was going to be keeping him for a year, you couldn't go anyplace without crossing a fairly wide creek. So I had my 30-day plan in mind. You plan, the longer you plan for, the faster it goes is kind of the philosophy that I go by. So day one, I walked him down to the edge of the creek along with my husband's mare, Sapphire. Sapphire was an old veteran creek crosser. So Sapphire hung out by the creek eating grass. Ron stood there and stared at the creek like, this is really weird. I've never seen anything like this before, but Sapphire's standing right there. So I guess it's not hurting anything. I didn't put any pressure on him. I just let him nibble grass. An hour later, he had discovered that the best grass was right in the net, right on the edge of the creek. So he's standing ankle deep in the creek eating grass. So this was social learning. He watched the older, wiser horse, saw that she was not afraid of the creek. Also social learning because he was seeing I was not afraid of the creek. So this is step one. But he's also curious about the creek and he's watching it because this is his water moving. He'd never seen that before. So that was day one. Took us about an hour. Day two, my husband set out on a trail ride. So I walked Bronze down to the creek, just lead lined her down to the creek to watch the other horses go across the creek. He had already decided that this was interesting enough to follow the other horses. And the creek was too deep for me to wade across with him. So I had to say, I'm sorry, we're not going today. So day three, I saddled him up. We followed Jerry and his horse down to the creek, and he just followed her across. It was partly investigative behavior because all the time he was grazing next to the creek, he had an eye on it. He was watching it. He had his chance to observe the creek. This is what it does. This is what the water does. And then he watched the other horses go across, and he saw their calm behavior crossing the creek. And day three, it was like, well, she's going across the creek, and she seems to know what she's doing, so I'll just follow her. And coming back across the creek, it was funny because he wanted to stop in the middle and observe the current. And he got so mesmerized by the current that he ended up walking downstream with the current, and we had to turn around and hike back upstream to get out of the ford. But for the rest of his life, when we crossed a creek on a hot day, he would stand on the edge of the creek, eyeball the creek, and then he would pick the deepest part of the creek to walk across because he loved being in the water. So that's an example of using multiple modes of learning. And the only negative reinforcement I ever needed was just my standard cues of, well, he's on lead, so he can't wander off, but I never forced him to go near the creek. I let him decide when he was ready to get near it. And when I was riding him, just my basic steering, but I never had to add extra leg at the creek. I just sat quietly. He watched Sapphire. So, yeah, okay, I'm ready to go. Off I go.
So one thing I want to question you on about what you said right there, you mentioned seeking behavior would involve reinforcement through intrinsic dopamine releases, right there. So would it be your contention then that negative reinforcement doesn't involve dopamine as well?
If I understand it right, the release from negative reinforcement produces dopamine, but it means I have to have already pushed the horse over into sort of a negative zone. The more I can keep him in the positive zone, so I never have to, so instead of getting dopamine from a release of pressure and relief, when I'm using investigative behavior, he's getting dopamine straight from the activity itself. There's something new, we're exploring it. So that way, I have not been the source of pushing him into a negative situation. I am now the person who's presented him with this opportunity for curiosity, and I'm right there. I'm not pushing him to go toward it. I'm not distracting him with treats. I'm just hanging out with him, and he gets to explore it at his own pace.
So a couple of things I would add as food for thought there, and feel free to jump in or to just say, okay, we'll move on. But there's a part of the brain that I don't hear talked about very much, and I find it very fascinating. It's called the striatum, and that is where dopamine is actually active. That is literally where in the brain the reinforcement of behaviors occur. And there's three parts to it. I believe it's dorsal, ventral, and medial. So in the first part of it is where we're going to typically see our light bulb moment dopamine. So that's the big licking and chewing, the big sigh of relief. So that's more what you're talking about. It's kind of that world of aversive where I added some stress and then relief from stress. What I find interesting and important is that there is a progression beyond that. So once that is only the scenario as the horse is actively learning. Once the horse has learned and we now have a cue established, they actually get the dopamine moves to a different part. It now goes to the medial or the central part of the striatum, and they now get the dopamine hit when the cue is given, which is the same thing as the aversive. So that could be I put my right leg on the horse and they know what that means, and they actually get the dopamine hit on the front end, not in conjunction with the release anymore. So it's an advancement in level of training, and it actually changes where and how and when the dopamine comes. And then the third part of the striatum is actually where the stereotypic behaviors come in. So things like cribbing, stall weaving, and that's actually closely related to addiction in humans, where we have a lot of drug, cocaine, and things like that work on the dopaminergic system. And so if we have dopamine going to that third part, that's a bad thing. We don't really want any activity there. So just as I understand it, I'm pretty sure that's all correct. Negative reinforcement, when we talk about they learn on the release, what we're actually saying there, the words that never get said, are on the beginning, first few days we're working on this when the horse doesn't really understand it yet. That is how it works. Week later, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, horse understands a cue at this point. It doesn't work that same way anymore. So you really shouldn't be seeing the calming signals later on in the process. And that is specifically because the dopamine is happening in a different place, different timing, all of that stuff. But negative reinforcement definitely does still involve reinforcement through dopamine in the brain. Again, I should say the caveat, done correctly. Everything can be done improperly, and you can change the scenarios of it. And I would really say, like, as you're describing this stuff, to me, I think it is important for us to remember that all of these behavioral theories, they are simply an organizational structure that some person posed and then they found evidence to back it up. But that's really, like, there can be a ton of overlap between them. We're looking at the same box from a different side or something like that. And they are 80% of what they do is overlapping, and there are just some small differences in how we might describe or whatever. But I do find, like, I do tend to see most things through that lens of classical and operant conditioning, because that's what I have studied more of, and I tend to see those same theories permeating all of the newer theories as well. I don't find that there's as much of a debunking or a step up. It's the remnants are still there, at least for me. But that's the kind of the lens I tend to view it through. So, for whatever that's worth, I'll throw that in your lap. If you want to respond, fine. If not, then we'll move on to the next.
Well, in the process of Brown's learning to cross the creek, we never had any licking and chewing. And in the process of my training Snickers, the first pony, we never had any licking and chewing. I don't get licking and chewing with Brandy, and I haven't with other horses I've worked with. I don't feel that I need the licking and chewing from release of stress in order for learning, because actually, once people push a horse into stress, you have to be watching very carefully that you don't end up trigger stacking and developing, putting in more. You get hit a cortisol. If you don't get the release, and a lot of people aren't watching horses' body language carefully enough. If you don't get that release, then the next hit of cortisol, we've got another trigger, and then we get another trigger, and then the horse blows up. So what I don't want to do is I don't want to get the release of dopamine from pushing them into the cortisol. I want to get the release of dopamine straight from the investigative behavior, or from play. If I can train them using play, like, hey, this is really fun to do this with me, then yeah, I mean, you do, for instance, doing a lot of training on trails. You're out on the trail, the horse is happy out in the woods. He likes being out there. It's like, hey, let's have a little collected trot down this hill. Well, that now he thinks it's play because he's out in the woods doing something he thinks is fun, and like playing when he's in the creek. So I'm still looking for that dopamine without me being the one. Now, when we run into something scary, that cortisol is going to go up. But I didn't make it happen. You know what I mean? We go out in the trail and a deer suddenly decides to leap across our trail. You know what's going to happen. But I didn't make that happen. And when it happens, I'm right there like, we're good. Just chill. Watch the deer go by, and then we'll move on. So that I'm the one who's providing the moral support after it happens from some other source. So that's my approach on it, because the problem is once the dopamine or once the cortisol gets too high, we get out of learning mode, and it doesn't. It's real easy to get beyond learning mode because then the prefrontal cortex is not working as clearly, and the horse is looking more at survival and less at learning, and more likely to be looking at learning, how do I avoid this, than what is it the person's asking me to do. So put it back at you. That's my take on it, and that's my understanding of it, having studied the courses.
So one thing I would say there, and I have been trying to remember the name of this for the last 45 seconds when you mentioned cortisol for the first time there. There's another theory that has some research. I'm just blanking on it, but basically it has to do with when we toggle back and forth and we add, more specifically, adrenaline, not necessarily cortisol, although that's definitely still going to be part of the mix. So you push something to an extreme where we're going to have cortisol and adrenaline, while learning doesn't necessarily take place at that moment. Afterwards, when it's processed, the more adrenaline we had, kind of the more strength we're going to have for the memory. And it kind of would be up to how it's processed as to whether that turns into what we might call good learning or bad learning, which could be trigger stacking, PTSD, something along those lines.
Yeah, and that's exactly the issue, is that too often when you get too high arousal on the negative side, then it's too easy to have the fear learning instead. But I think where we're very much in agreement is that horses have to learn to go into a high arousal state and then calm down again. I mean, otherwise you wouldn't dare let your horse trot or canter or go into a hand gallop, because you'd never get them back. But if I take my horse out in the woods and we have a nice clear spot and I let him have a hand gallop, and he might be pretty excited, and now he does have to learn to come back and quiet down. And he has to learn that when he's having a hand gallop, that leaping and bucking is not part of the approved program. So this is still learning to cope with the high arousal, but I've let him do something that is inherently fun for him in the process of doing this. And same with situations that you can't avoid. We had to take Brandy to the equine hospital at Cornell. She had to ride in a trailer, not her favorite thing. She had to go into a strange place. She didn't know if we were ditching her, what was going to happen to her there. Lots of scary things looking. And so I know she was way up, but I was with her. She knew I was staying with her, and I was guiding her. I was like, this is what you need to do. Yep. Here's like 4 people. They're all surrounding you, but they're all acting like vets. You know what you're supposed to do for a vet visit, because I've already shown her. I didn't wait for the vet to come the first time and have her go egads. I went through with her. Well, this is what's going to happen when the vet comes. You might get a shot. You're going to get looked at. She's going to look in your eyes. You're going to look at all this. So I try to prepare the horse ahead of time so that they already know what I'm going to want them to do when they get into that high arousal state.
So would you say that you are, like you mentioned, calming signals, you're tending to not see those? And I'm trying to bring in the notion of threshold. I don't know if that's a term that you really use a lot, but that's another one of the ideas out there right now, is that we should never push a horse past threshold. And my thought on that is that's threshold isn't so much a line as it is a zone. And if you aren't challenging that, you're not going to make much progress. And if you're not very skillful at it, which it would be where most people are, you're going to cross that line and you're going to get them into a cortisol state and all of that. Definitely, it's probably going to happen to you multiple times a day. And so my fear of that notion is it's a little, I think it's a little more idyllic and a little less practical for most people, because they're not going to have the skill to ride that line without crossing it. And I don't want people to feel like if you cross that line, like the game's over, because it's not. You're going to cross that line many times. It's going to be okay. It's going to be just fine. You're not, if you trigger even fight or flight, like they don't stay there forever. If you just hang out, they're going to come back. Like it isn't the end of the day necessarily. There can be a point where you have trigger stacking, and yeah, there is a point at which they've had all they could take today. I'm not saying that, but don't feel like if you push a horse and they responded in a more motivated way than you anticipated, that's okay. That happens to everybody, and it's going to continue to happen to you. And you should expect that it's going to happen, anticipate that it's going to happen, and then you just adjust. And that's part of the essence of horsemanship, is taking the new data and adjusting to it, and don't clumsily cross that line the same way the next time necessarily. But like that to me is, if I'm starting a colt or something, I very much want to investigate that line and find out what that colt can really handle and what they can't. And if I cross the line, how dangerously might they react to it, or is their reaction not that big of a deal? How careful do I have to be here? To me, that is incredibly important information for me to possess. And so my fear is, with kind of that talk of not, and I'm not saying you're claiming this, but like the no calming signals part of it, that would involve not pushing a horse very far at all. And so if I had taken a horse very far in that route, how would I feel secure about the what ifs? The moose comes out on the trail when I'm riding, the dog chases the horse, and this is the first time I feel that heart thump between my feet, like a sledgehammer dropped into a trash can or something. Here's the adrenaline dump. I've never been around this horse when this happened. So like, I don't want to experience that and be helpless for the first time 10 miles from the ranch. I want to experience that in the round pen on day 1 or 2 and so forth. So how would you negotiate what I'm clumsily trying to describe here? I think you have a beat on what I'm inarticulately rambling on about.
I think I understand what you're saying. What you're saying is you want to have some confidence that when the horse gets pushed over, when life pushes the horse over his threshold, that you already have some sense of how to handle it and how to help him get back to a calmer, safer state. And I think I think that is indeed a tricky one. But my experience has been, if I push the horse there, then he's going to be a little more wary of me and a little less likely to trust. So I've got an example with my horse Bronze. He was probably a few months under saddle, and it was one of our first solo trail rides. And he was not particularly accustomed to dogs. And we were walking across the field, minding our own business, and 2 Rottweilers charged off their porch, barking and snarling at us. And Bronze's instinct, of course, any sane horse, his instinct was, let's spin and bolt for home. And I grew up with, you never let your horse bolt and panic, and you never run from a threatening dog. So I was like, no, Bronze, we're going to turn around and face the dogs. Of course, he thought I was insane. He spun a 180, actually. And I'm like, no, Bronze, we're going to face the dogs. He's like, I think you're insane, but I had a plan. I mean, I was probably as scared as he was because I didn't know these dogs. I didn't know what was going to happen, and I knew my horse was athletic enough to buck me off if he wanted to. But I said, we are going to face the dogs. And I tried talking to the dogs. I tried my best dog trainer voice, like, stop right there, down. And they thought a minute and thought, well, we don't take orders from you. And they kept coming at us. Unfortunately, their owner came out and sent them home. But my point is, Bronze stayed with me. He did precisely what I asked him to do. And it was not because I had never pushed him over threshold. And he had not had a lot of conditioning. We were only like 3 months into his riding career. He listened because he trusted that I was going to keep him safe. So that's what, and the other piece of that is we have to have the communication. You've got to, you can't tell the horse what you want him to do if he doesn't understand what you want. So the really important part of that to me is that he trusts that you're going to look out for him, and he understands what you want him to do. So when Bronze saw the dogs, spun around, ready to bolt for home, he understood exactly what I meant when I picked up my right rein, gave him a little left leg, and said, no, we're going to turn back this way. He was so hyped that he did a 180 instead of just going halfway and facing the dogs. And we had a course correct. But the point was, he understood my signals, and he trusted me to keep him safe. So that's my view on the cortisol, is if I'm not pushing him or on the on pushing the horse in there, he trusted me to keep him safe. And I think that's the bottom line. And I don't think there's a magic to that. I think that comes from what we talked about earlier, where you have the clear cues, you have the clear expectations, you have the clear signals. Even though we hadn't had a lot of riding time, Bronze knew that he had certain rules that, there's certain rules to follow, and he needed to follow them. And so he knew that he could trust that I meant what I said.
So one thing I would want to just say here, and I feel like this is a little bit of the semantics of it, but again, I would liken this to the desensitization conversation and the difference between the horse becoming braver versus less scared. I would challenge this a little bit. If the things that you are doing that challenge your horse, if the horse is associating the challenge of that with you, that would be a bad thing. You are not handling things properly there. The scary, challenging part of it should be the dog, the cow, the teeter-totter, the creek, the whatever. It shouldn't be me. I'm helping you negotiate this challenging thing. And if I'm in that position, then our bond is going to increase. The trust in me, the leadership points that I have with the horse, all of that will be increased. If I have set that up in such a way that the horse views me as having put him in a bind, you're going to have a very different result.
That's exactly right. And going back to the desensitizing, if I lay the tarp down and say, here, I'm walking on it, you can see it safe. When you're ready, you can join me on the tarp. And 5 minutes later, he's probably going to be playing with it. But if I pick the tarp up and wave it in his face before he has a chance to check it out, I've become the source. And now I've raised his anxiety level. And if you raise the anxiety level and have the cortisol going too much, then you have a horse who just lives in anxiety mode with that cortisol going. And then you have that horse that people say, my horse is so spooky, he spooks at everything. He's got a hair trigger. I can't take him anywhere. I can't do anything with him. And I think that's how they get there. But back to the calming signals. The calming signals I see as information. And what's tricky about them, and this is what's tricky about a lot of horse, a lot of the body language communication between horses and people going both ways. Horses do a lot of things that mean one thing to them, and people interpret as something else. And so when we have that miscommunication, horses often end up being punished for something that they thought was a perfectly respectful thing to do. And the calming signal is information. It's tricky to know what they are sometimes because calming signals are behaviors that can be something else. Maybe my horse rubbed his nose on his shin because he's offering a calming signal, or maybe his nose itched. maybe he's shaking his head because he's feeling overstressed, or maybe he shook his head because the flies were bugging him. So you have to watch these and watch the context. But just because I see a calming signal doesn't mean I need to stop what I'm doing. But it's information that says to me, my horse is reaching that point where he's feeling tense about this. So my next question then is, how can I help him feel confident about it instead? And when the horse associates me with helping him feel confident, then that helps build that trust, that he'll look to me for guidance. Just like what Tom Doran said, the first thing he wants to get with a horse he rides is that horse is going to look to him for guidance when he's unsure what to do.
Yeah. Again, I kind of look at that as stages, like, and I may well just work horses with a little more intensity than you do. And I do that purposefully, like with working cattle. I come from a cutting horse background. And so we would have what we would call dry work. And that is putting a handle on a horse in an arena without a cow present. And then we're working the horse on cattle. You can work a horse much more intensely on cattle because the horse tends to associate that intensity with the cow and he doesn't blame you for it. And so it can add some of the adrenaline that we want, the more high performance, faster, harder sorts of movements to the deal. But I don't get penalized for any of that because, again, it's the cow that's doing it as far as the horse is concerned. So I would, like, if I'm starting a colt, the way that I go about things, I would see lots of the calming signals. A month later, I wouldn't see nearly as many because they are, they're in the groove now. We're getting more to that second layer of the striatum where they understand the cues. We've got a conversation going, a give and a take, and now they're going to be getting dopamine at the start of certain things because we're not having light bulb moments all the time. There may still be new, I guess at a certain point you don't really have anything new to introduce to them. That certainly wouldn't be the case 30 days in, but
yeah.
I would say if I've been riding a horse 2 years and all of a sudden I'm seeing lots of calming signals one day, that would not be a data point I would like. That would tell me something is up, because what's all the stress he shouldn't be stressed at this point. He should know what's going on, and so now something is up. So I just wanted to clarify that, I guess. So you have, through all of this, come up with this term that I appreciate quite a bit, protector leadership. When you were starting on this book and this journey, I guess kind of like the book title, did you have you're going to create protector leadership, and this was how you went about it, or did you go about this study thing and protector leadership is what emerged at the other end?
No, that was like the end result, not the starting point. What I was looking for was to figure out what do trainers do who have really happy, working, reliable horses? And then what does the science say about that? And then where do the emotions fit? Where does horses' intelligence fit? How do we put all this together? And as I put it together, I was seeing the people who really have had some brilliant success with some very difficult horses, and they emphasize this need to earn the horse's trust, and that the horses want to feel like they can count on us to look out for them. Have you got my back? Really, have you? And my husband and I kicked this around for months. It's like, well, what do we call this? Because there's other people have, like, they're training horses in certain techniques or certain ways. This doesn't have to do with technique. This has to do with what's our goal and what's our interaction with the horse. You might be training a horse for cutting or jumping or to be a trail horse or a therapeutic riding horse. It's the same concept of establishing that trusting relationship where the horse can be in confident learning mode. And so we kept kicking around because lots of people do this, but they have their own different names for it. And none of those names seemed to me to really fit. And I kept saying, it's really about being the horse's protector and reassuring him that he can count on me to look out for him. And And finally, one night, my husband and I had another long discussion. We said, that's the word, it's protector. The very next day, it was funny how these things happen. The very next day, I saw an article by Kim Wallens. And you're probably familiar. Are you familiar with Kim Wallens? Maybe not, because you're not an eventer. She was, her horse, the Gray Goose, is in the Eventing Hall of Fame. Kim's my age. She was riding in the 80s, I believe. Very famous. And her horse, the Gray Goose, started out as a difficult horse nobody else could ride. And he turned into a world-class event horse who would jump pretty much anything that she pointed him at because he loved to jump. And I read this article by Kim that said, "Are you your horse's protector?" And so that was like the day after Jerry and I came up with the idea. Protector's the word. This is really the word. The next day I read that article by Kim, like, okay, if she says this, then this really is the right word. I'm really on the right track with this. So, and I never set out to develop my own brand of horsemanship. I never meant for this to be my brand of horsemanship. I'm not claiming I came up with anything new. What I did was research what works great for other people. I appreciate what I learned from other people. What I've added to it that's different is just the name, and bringing in using investigative behavior or curiosity, and using social learning, because almost nobody else uses that. But even that's not new. People have done that for a long time. You know, the old scheme of take a new trail horse on his first rides behind, you take the green trail horse on his first rides behind the seasoned trail horse. That's social learning. The green horse is watching the seasoned horse and learning. But we can be part of that social learning too when we have that trust with the horse, because horses will copy individuals they trust. And so that makes it real easy to teach horses to lead, because you just copy what I'm doing. And you don't have to teach them. It's something they automatically, that it comes naturally to them.
So I had planned to circle back to this, but something you just said just prompts me to do it. So going back to the dominance theory hierarchy stuff, one of the techniques that I've used for a long time, and I consider it almost like a secret weapon. If I will get a pretty insecure horse, or maybe some of these orphans that, or not orphans, but early weaned or whatever, they didn't get the herd dynamic behavior education that they should have.
But I think orphan is almost a good term to use for it, because that's almost what happens to them. So go ahead.
They're the low pecking order. They're going to be more affected by the world than affecting the world kind of horses. A phenomenal exercise to do with those horses is to get the more dominant horses in your herd, put them in the arena, and then you either groundwork that horse and you kind of lead the horse along and chase the other horses away, or if you feel like you can safely ride the horse and do the same thing, that will just exponentially grow a horse's confidence. It is a true secret weapon kind of an exercise where they get to piggyback off of my leadership, and now I can drive alpha mare away, where normally alpha mare would have you cowering in the corner over here, but because you're with me, we can now push the other horses around and control things. And those horses will just, they grow right there in front of your eyes in terms of their confidence.
You're protecting the youngster from the older horse who might push him around.
Exactly. And they get to piggyback off of me. So to me, that ties right in with the dominance theory hierarchy type of stuff. I've been doing that for 20 years or something. I also do, just as an aside, like I have a video on YouTube where I'm doing this with stallions. I'll put a bunch of loose horses in the arena and lead them around, ride them around and stuff, where they learn to maintain under my control, even though we've got all these distractions and other motivating things around. But so does that bring more of the dominance hierarchical stuff into the conversation for you, or do you think that's a totally separate thing and not what's going on here at all?
I don't think, I think it very much brings in the protector role. You've put yourself in the protector role. As far as dominance, in the sense that, and we're still talking about dominance hierarchies in domestic herds, if that youngster has felt threatened by that older horse that you're protecting him from, doesn't really matter what the dynamics of that are. I think you've become the protector, and you've shown him that you are willing to and able to look out for him.
So I guess that's my question is, wouldn't I feel like, would you agree that words like protector and leadership inherently involve you in a dominant role with the horse?
Leadership, by definition, to me and to horses, is a responsibility position. I can't fulfill that responsibility unless I am able to have the last word when I need to with the horse. So if I'm handling the horse and he says, that vet's coming at me with that funny looking machine, no way, no how, I have to be able to say, I'm sorry, we really do need to cooperate here. And if I'm out riding and he says, I see that pig over that creature over there. I've never seen a creature that looks like that, and I want to run away. I have to be able to say, negative. We're going to stand here and watch it. So yeah, I have to outrank. I think dominance has become a really tricky word. So I think I would rather say, yes, I have to outrank the horse. But on the other hand, there's also times that because choice is one of those inherent positive things that brings up dopamine. Giving horses choices, because one of the innate fears is lack of choice in your life, and one of the major welfare issues for horses is most of them have very little choice in their lives. They're told, this is everything is prescribed: what they eat, where they eat, who they hang out with, how they're ridden, what they get to do. And so I have found that it really brings out a lot of good in horses when I give them choices. But and that means that sometimes I have to give them the choice to take the leader role. And I started this, so for example, with Bronze when we trail ride. When he was young, if we came to an obstacle on the trail, well, of course, his first reaction the first time was, "Oh, oops, we can't go there. I guess we turn around." I said, "No, wait, we're going to look at this and see how can we get over, under, around, or through this thing." And over time, he started to understand, oh yeah, the goal is to get to the other side safely. And so it got that we would come up to a trail obstacle and I'd just sit there. I'd just rest my rein hand on his neck. I'm like, "What do you think, Bronze?" And he would look it over. And usually he would usually pick a safe way. If he started by picking something that didn't look safe, I could just say, "Nope, that one won't work." But it got so that he would automatically look for the safest way around and often see a better spot than I did. And then he would make his way through it. And so, and he liked, I think, the idea that I trusted him to do that. And then because I was giving him choices, because he knew that he could make that if he made good choices, part of my depth perception problem is I don't judge height well. So when we'd come up to a low-hanging branch, Bronze would stop in front of the branch. That was my signal to make sure that I ducked before we went underneath it. He's the only horse I've ever ridden who even noticed anything happened above his saddle horn. But he would stop and give me the chance to do that. So there were times that, a horse can't take care of you if you don't teach him to make good choices. And he can only learn to make good choices if you start with the little ones and give him bigger and bigger ones as he earns them.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I kind of view, again, sort of in terms of progress and in stages. I'm going to do more micromanaging in the beginning, and then I'm going to get more relaxed about certain things. And now that's where the partnership's supposed to develop. Now you have your job and you should understand it. And here's a responsibility. And I hope you don't let me down, kind of,
Yeah, absolutely. And then that also leaves room for intelligent disobedience. I don't know if I've never heard anybody else in the horse world use this, but I've learned it from seeing eye dog trainers, I guess, use it. And there was a time my husband and I were riding in the state forest. We'd done this trail many times before, and all of a sudden the horses stopped in front of a culvert, and they're like, "We're not crossing that. No way, no how. We are not setting foot going across that culvert." They were willing, and we agreed. We said, "Okay, they've got a reason." And they were willing to do something a lot more work We went through the underbrush, scrambled down a creek bank and across the dry creek bed and up the other side and wove through saplings. A couple of weeks later, got a phone call from a friend who said, "Don't cross that culvert. Whatever you do, there's dangerous sinkholes where it's eroded." We didn't see anything, but the horses did. When my horse says, "This is not safe," I trust him. And that's what I call intelligent disobedience. There was a good reason for it. It wasn't just, I don't feel like going down that trail. And we've got to have some trust in them in order to recognize those things. Because some of the biggest trouble I've gotten into is when they didn't trust that.
We're currently living that with my 18-year-old son. It remains to be seen whether the disobedience is intelligent or not, but I guess time will tell.
Yeah, well, and adolescent males can be tricky. Ours turned out just great. So hang in there with hope.
Yes, ma'am. So we have touched on this quite a few times throughout the conversation about people lacking clarity in their communication. So what can people do to make sure that they are clear with what they're trying to communicate to their horse?
A lot of that, I think, has to do with making sure that you know what your body language is saying to a horse. So I think a lot of people have the idea, well, I do this, my horse should do that. But horses are really, really subtle at the reading of our body language. It's part of being a prey animal is having a really, really clear observation of what somebody else is doing. For instance, horses know what our facial expressions mean. You smile at a horse and they understand that a smile is much better than a frown. They understand what anger means, but they also notice super subtle things. When I was teaching Brandy to back up remotely, I taught her that if I tapped the air with my finger, that means back up. Well, sometimes she did, sometimes she didn't. Like, what the heck is this? Finally, I figured out that if I leaned back, she backed up. That's what she wasn't looking at my finger. She was looking at the position of my body. So horses are often not looking at what we think they're looking at, but this is their interpretation of the body language. So the more we can figure out how they interpret something, the better, the more we can communicate with them. It's like saying to somebody, if somebody's speaking another language, you can't say, well, this word means that, because this is their language. It's what the word means to them. But people do this with horses all the time. Well, yeah, I should be able to do this, and the horse should know to do that. If you watch your horse, and this is the biggest thing, you have to trust them. And this is what Brandy reinforced. Bronze showed me all his life, but Brandy really reinforced it, that if she doesn't do what I think I told her to do, I don't need to correct her. I need to correct me. I need to trust that she is interpreting and she's willing to do what I've asked. And that's the big leap of faith for so many people. So many people have been taught over and over, horses they're lazy, they want to be dominant over you, they want to do this, they want to do that, and they're going to take advantage of you. You have to trust them. And then it becomes a two-way street. You have to trust that what their interpretation of your body language is really what they understand. And once I figured that out, then I could learn from Brandy. Like, well, if I do this, what does she do? And then you play with it. And if you don't correct them, you can't be wrong. So if I signal her to go this way or that way and she doesn't go, no big deal. I just have to figure out which part of the signal did I not get right.
Are you familiar with the story of Clever Hans?
Oh, yes. He's a perfect example. How many people did they have on the Hans Commission trying to study him and figure out what it was and how subtle was that? And they concluded he wasn't very smart, but what they missed was he was actually in some ways smarter than any of the people who were studying him, because he saw the subtle change in the questioner's body language that the other people all missed.
Why don't I'll let you just kind of, for the listeners that might not be aware of that story, do you want to give them a little synopsis of what I'm talking about there?
Sure. I think this was back in the it was the early 1900s. A German math teacher had a stallion he called Clever Hans, and he taught Hans to do math. And Hans could even do advanced math. He would paw the ground with his right foreleg once for each count, and he would get the right answer even to very complex math questions. He entertained lots of people with this, and people couldn't, and so it became such a big question that a commission was actually formed of teachers and horse trainers and veterinarians and a whole bunch of other things. And these people watched, and they could not figure out what was going on because they couldn't see Hans's handler giving him any cues at all. So how did the horse know the answer? And finally, somebody figured it out when they realized that Hans couldn't come up with the answer if he couldn't see the questioner. He had to be able to see the questioner, and the way he was coming up with the answer was there would be a very subtle relaxation of the tension in the questioner's body when Hans got to the right number. And that worked with both his regular handler and with other people. He was that good at reading people's reactions. And I still find that phenomenal, that a horse was that subtle.
Yeah, you proved what you were trying to prove, but not in the way that you thought you were proving it.
Yeah, right. They definitely proved he was smart, just not the way they thought he was.
I think it was one of Roy Rogers's triggers was trained to do that, but it was off of the blink of the handler. So they had basically trained him to paw per blink. And so if the math answer was 4, he would blink 4 times and the horse would paw 4 times. So anyway.
But even that's pretty clever on the horse's part to figure out to watch, but it shows you how minute a signal they'll watch.
Like I just can't get over when I see some of these clinicians have their people doing groundwork and they'll have the person leaning over where like their ear is 2 feet off of the ground to disengage the hindquarters. And I'm like that's way more of a signal than the horse needs. That almost looks like that was a bet done. I bet I can get all of these people to go out there and lean over so far and look ridiculous because the horse needs such a subtle cue. It's yeah.
Well, you've probably experienced this yourself, Daniel, when you're riding. You ever get the feeling like the horse is practically reading your mind? Like, I don't dare think canter because if I think canter, he's going to do it.
Yeah, hopefully. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I mean, that to me now, not everybody wants that. And I got my husband on bronze one time. His mare was super good at screening out extraneous signals. I got him on bronze one time. Bronze took everything literally, and he'd overreact. Jerry would overcompensate. After about 10 minutes, Jerry got off and handed me the reins and said, "I am never riding your Ferrari horse again." But I loved it. I love that I could think it. He was doing it, and then he would read me. We had a really tight situation come up one time. We were cantering along a trail in the woods that was normally clear for canter. Came around the bend. There's a tree across the trail. No big deal. We jumped logs. And it wasn't until a couple of strides out I saw it wasn't a normal down tree. It was a pine tree with broken branches sticking up, so that it was much higher than I thought. And this was my faulty vision and blurry vision. There were spiky branches sticking up, and this was much higher than anything we had jumped. And I had a split second to make the decision. Do I ask him to stop and risk he skids into it and gets skewered in the chest? Do I risk letting him jump it? And then what if he doesn't make it all the way over? And in that instant, I felt Bronze's body say, I've got it. I can do this. So I just took the best jumping position I could in my Western saddle, closed my legs on him and thought jump big, and he sailed over that like we did 4-foot oxers every day. Set up a cross rail in the arena, mind you, and we'd both have a meltdown. But when you have to, there's and that's the horse coming through for you. But also that he was able to communicate to me, I've got this. So all I had to do was stay out of his way.
So would you say that we evil, mean, negative reinforcement trainers using aversives all the time cannot possibly train a reliable horse?
I think what's really tricky here is you can't train a horse without negative reinforcement. We all know that you cannot train a horse without negative reinforcement. They've got to know to yield to pressure. And if they don't, it's dangerous for everybody. So negative reinforcement clearly has a place. Pressure and release. Well, let me back that up. Pressure and release is what we absolutely have to have, because that's our communication. That's our touch communication. You can't ride without it. I don't think that always has to be negative. We could say technically, okay, I give my horse a canter cue. That's a squeeze. Is that negative reinforcement? Some people might say it is. I don't think it is. That's a cue. That's permission to do what he wanted to do in the first place.
Yeah, let me just, I feel a little obligated just to clarify this here, because you've been using the words positive and negative within the scope of what Jaak Panksepp has been discussing, where you could almost say pleasant and unpleasant as synonyms in that scenario. In operant conditioning, negative and positive simply mean addition, or negative means subtraction, and positive means addition. And so riding a horse with negative reinforcement means I put my right leg on, and then when the horse moves away from it, does the cue that I'm asking for, I remove the leg. That's the negative part, the removal. That's the removal of the aversive or the stimulus. So it doesn't have anything to do with good or bad or pleasant or unpleasant in that context. It can get really tricky using positive, negative in some of these scientific ways, because they don't necessarily mean the same thing in all contexts. But
exactly, yeah, that's a really good point, and that's what I was trying to clarify, that pressure and release is not all bad. I mean, I think that's one confusion that people have, that we should never use pressure. I don't agree. I think we need to make sure when we use pressure that we make sure the horse understands what he's supposed to do to release the pressure. That's our job, make sure he understands it. But I see no reason why we need to avoid pressure when that's a basic communication. As far as the negative reinforcement goes, the tricky part of that is that I think there's a lot of people who would say that they're basically negative reinforcement trainers, and yet they are intuitively using a lot of positives, where they may praise the horse, where they may make sure that once the horse has done something well, they let him do something he enjoys. They take the horse out for trail rides that the horse enjoys, where I think there's a lot of positives that can get mixed in, that the person may be intuitively using, not necessarily defining this as like, well, yeah, I follow my negative reinforcement with this positive thing, or with this thing that the horse likes. If a horse, and this is where the research is going, if a horse is trained solely with positive reinforcement, the general reaction is that they are more likely to be anxious, more likely to avoid people. That's if you train solely with negative reinforcement. So, but what I'm saying is, I think that people who successfully have horses that they have a good connection with, and the horses become happy, reliable partners, I think they're also incorporating other things. Well, as you described yourself, you're incorporating social learning. And when you take horses out and work cows, if they like working cows, you probably got the play emotion going right there. If they think that working cows is fun, so you've got the positives going there. That's where I think it's very tricky to make any blanket statements about negative reinforcement.
Yeah, all of the different modalities have their pros and cons associated with them. I mean, there's just no working around that, and you always have the human aspect of it. So all of the modalities are theoretical. How you put them into practice could be done better or worse. So your results may vary.
Yeah. And of course, each horse is going to be different. And part of being a good trainer is being able to adapt to each horse. And I think that's where a lot of people have gotten in trouble, is they get a training system, or they follow a certain trainer. Well, this trainer says I do this, and then I do this, and then I do this, and my horse should do that. And they don't have the skills or the confidence to observe the horse's emotional reaction and adjust accordingly.
So within this concept of protector leadership, and we've kind of touched on this, but just so that I ask the straight up question, does that mean that we are always protecting the horse from stress?
No, absolutely not. Because he's got to learn to cope with it, because stress is part of life. No, it means that I don't want to be the source of unnecessary stress. Some stress is going to be necessary. When I first had Brandy, she was afraid to leave the barnyard. Just walking up my driveway to the mailbox was scary for her. That didn't mean that I took her back to the barn and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, you're stressed. We'll just let you stay in the barn." It meant that I kept taking her up the road and giving her a chance to observe things so that she could learn through social learning and investigative behavior. We did all kinds of exciting things, like looking in the mailbox, looking in the recycle bin, wander down the road, look in the hay shed. There was a lot of stress for her there, but the stress was in the environment. And I was still the protector who was with her saying, "I got your back. And I'm reassuring you by my model and my calmness that you're safe here and I'm looking out for you."
So would you say that the protector aspect of this is what enables the curiosity? Those two things kind of go hand in hand.
Ooh, that's a great question. I think
I know I'm good at this, Lynn. This is what I do for a living. I mean, come on.
You've got lots of great questions, and yeah, I think I hadn't put it together quite like that, but I think you're absolutely right. When a horse sees something scary, chances are he's not going to want to go up and investigate that by himself. But if you're with him and you're reassuring him, in fact, we had a funny one. One day, I was doing barn chores. Brandy was in the arena. My husband was on the opposite side of the arena cutting down trees. When Brandy heard the chainsaw start up, she ran across the arena and whinnied up at me like, "Lynn, help, something really strange is going on out here." So I went down and I walked across the arena. Now, I didn't put any pressure on her. I walked across the arena, called out to my husband, turned off the chainsaw for a minute. And when I looked around, Brandy was standing behind me. Well, the protector goes first, right? So Jerry turned off the chainsaw. He talked to her and she's like, "Oh, that was Jerry and a piece of machinery." Okay. So we chatted for a little bit. He started the chainsaw back up and she stood there with me. We watched him for a little while. End of story. So she never had the pressure of my saying, "You have to come across here." But my modeling it was what made her feel safe. When she, by herself, she ran away from it. But when I was with her, she went. And then there's the sequence in our book about the overturned trash can in the paddock, where Brandy was afraid to go near it until Sapphire didn't even look at it, but Sapphire didn't even go up to it, but Sapphire just trotted past because Sapphire was her trusted senior. Sapphire was older and wiser. Sapphire wasn't worried. That's when Brandy was able to go up. So what we want to do is we want to be that like older, wiser horse who says, this is okay. You can go up and check this out.
I did a little video I think I put it up on our Instagram not long ago, but basically I had a bunch of chainsaw work to do in the pasture, cutting down a bunch of little scrub trees that had grown up. And it was several hours worth of work. And I've got 20 horses following me all around the pasture as I'm cutting trees down. I mean, like 20 feet away. I mean, they were right there behind me. And all I could think about was I did a little video on it because of this, because as you and I are recording this, it's right after New Year's. But all over social media, come fireworks season, you're going to have people pleading with their neighbors to, "Hey, I have horses. Like, don't pop any fireworks because it'll scare my horses." I'm like, "That's a you problem because my horses aren't scared of that at all." They're going to, investigate. We can go shoot in the pasture, shoot and skeet with my son all the time. And we'll have horses 50 feet behind us as we're out there shooting. So that's train your horse. That's all that means, right?
Yeah, and again, that's a great example of you didn't do anything to pressure them. Yeah, you were the source of the chainsaw noise, but you were the one holding the chainsaw. You weren't asking them to get near it. And that gave them lots of scope to come up and observe and check it out. And Yeah,
investigative behavior.
That's investigative behavior, and speaking of fireworks, I have a long article, a detailed article on my website about fireworks, where I enlisted from multiple different trainers. How do you prepare a horse for fireworks? Or if you get caught unaware, what can you do to help them? And then I got some great feedback from some of the people that follow my page on ways that they had helped their horses deal with fireworks. And yeah, I mean, the worst thing is when a horse is alone and you're not there. But if you're there, there's lots of things you can do to help them feel safe with it and get over their fear, or at least get to the point where they're not going to endanger themselves with their fear.
So I don't want to be respectful of your time and not keep you too much longer, but are you working on another book? What's in the works for the future for you?
I am. Yep. Yeah, it was at first it was going to be about equine intelligence, but I've kind of expanded it beyond that, because there's so many ways that horses are smart that and people have been kind of looking at I think they've tended to look at the wrong things, and there's lots of ways that humans squelch horses' intelligence. They don't think they give horses nearly enough time to think things through when we ask them a question, or enough time to go around and investigate things and learn from different things, and not enough choices to figure out how to understand what their job's supposed to be, what they need to do. And there's just so many ways that horses are way smarter than people give them credit for. And that's a pretty exciting thing to be researching now. And there's going to be surprises in it. There will be big surprises in it.
So how are we going about defining intelligence and quantifying that in some manner?
There's the big question. Yeah. And that's where a lot of it's gone wrong, is that people have measured intelligence according to like human IQ scores, which are shown to be biased even within human population, biased by socioeconomic group and by culture. So the traditional ways of studying intelligence don't work with animals. What I'm looking at is ways that horses show intelligence that aren't what we would normally define as intelligence. But intelligence basically is what do animals need to know in order to survive, to get along in life.
Well, that does sound interesting. Do you have a timeline on that? Is this something you're still working on, or we're waiting on the publisher, or what?
No, I'm still working on it. I have not even pitched the proposal to my publisher yet. I like to be further along with the book and be able to give them a really detailed outline and some finished chapters before I get there. Still working on it.
Okay. Well, I would just tell you, I would advise you to expect Palaminos to be stupid. I think that's the way it's going to come out. But no bias intended whatsoever. That's just God's honest truth.
All right. Now that you've thrown that challenge out, I'm going to have to think about how many ways our Palomino is intelligent, so I can mention those in the book. But I'll tell you one other thing that I'm doing that's unique here is a lot of what is intelligent about horses is not amenable to scientific statistical study. And that's part of the reason that intelligence has not been well studied in horses. A lot of it has to come from us horse people. We're the ones that see horses in everyday situations that can't be recreated, who see how horses react in crises that a researcher can't ethically recreate. And I got 7,000 followers on Facebook. When I pose a question, I get lots of really thoughtful responses. Those aren't statistically, scientifically valid, but they show us possibilities. If 50 people say, I've had a horse do this, well, okay, so we can't prove that every horse can do it, but clearly some horses are capable of doing it.
Yeah, that would be something I like you. I read a lot of research stuff, and there are often more holes in that than we tend to attribute to it. Kind of like the clever Hans thing. A lot of times like there's the one going on about the horse's ability to remember cues over long periods of time.
Yeah.
That 20-year, it was a 20-year study, a fairly small sample size, and they would have a horse remember a cue. I think they taught the cue, then they tested again at like 6 months and 1 year and 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, something like that. I've had horses that would forget by Monday what you worked on Friday. Just because some horses maintained that for a period of time doesn't mean all will. And then there have also been, do they remember a cue, and do they execute the cue under stressful circumstances? Those are not the same thing. Like there, the thought I have here is, I rode this horse at some period and he was fine, and now he's been in pasture for 2 years, and so I should be safe to saddle him up, step up there, and ride him off because he did that 2 years ago. And horses remember things for long periods of time, so that's logical and is good sense, right? No, he's going to kill you. That's stupid. Don't do that. That's my
Yeah,
thought
you can't.
process on some of these.
Right. It's foolish to make assumptions like that. On the other hand, the memory for cues has a lot to do with their emotional state when they learn the cue. So, and this is why I'm always very careful of that cortisol business, because the higher the cortisol is, the less likely they're going to remember that cue later. The learning that goes with positive emotional states is less likely to be the learning how to avoid something, and more likely to be the learning of what we want done. And also, it takes time for them to process cues, and a lot of people go too fast. So they say, okay, do this, do this, do this, do this. Well, when did the horse get a chance to stop and think, okay, what was it I just did that was correct? When I had Brandy here for the first 6 months, we sent her back to the rescue for the winter because we didn't have pasture arrangement and shed arrangement for her to stay for the winter. Sent her back for the winter. 7 months later, we went and collected her. She walked into the trailer with me with only maybe 5 seconds hesitation. And when she came back, it was as if she had not been gone for 1 day. She remembered absolutely everything that I taught her. There is no regression. And she remembered with confidence. Yep, this is what we're doing here. This is what you need for that. So a lot of that memory has to do with the emotional state the horse was in when it was taught, and did you give them time? You've probably had this happen. You try and teach something. You try and teach something, and they're not getting it. They're not getting it. So you just go do something good that they like, and they can be successful. You put them up. Next day you come out, and they've got the thing that they didn't have the first day. That's part of that. The memory needs processing time.
Yes, ma'am. I always incorporate a lot of stops in the middle of my ride where we're just going to sit here for 2 minutes and let you process what we just did and all of that stuff. So even though I ride with more intensity than a lot of people would, I'm also letting their RPMs come back down and for them to reset periodically throughout rides.
And that might be more important than you realize, because that.
Oh no, it's key.
Okay, yeah, because that's given them that's giving them time to process the information. Some of the most treacherous horses I've ridden, and I rode quite a few of them when I was horse hunting, are the horses whose trainers always like, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, and the horse never gets a break. And I actually rode a half dozen horses who were trained by the same person who always was like this. And one of them was an absolute nervous wreck. She was like so far gone, I got off. She wasn't even safe to be on. One of them said, let me just buck you off to start with. And happily, he wasn't a great bucker, so it was no big deal. But, and the other horses were all like so tense. It's like, what do I need to do? What do I need to do? And most of them, if I just sat and breathed, said, it's okay. I'm going to give you time to respond. And I'm going to give you time to tell you when you did the right thing. And then they're like, can I go home with you? But those pauses are so important.
Absolutely, they should be designed in there. I think
Yes.
if you rode a horse constantly going forward for 50 minutes, you wasted 45 minutes. Is kind of what happened there, and no wonder it takes 10 years for you to train a horse, because that they're not learning efficiently with the way that you're going about doing that.
Well, actually, unfortunately, what they're learning is that being ridden is a really scary thing. I'm always in, if they knew the word cortisol, they'd say, oh, that cortisol is always in my body. And I don't want a saddle on me. I don't want a person on me. Let me just like skip this whole thing and you can't even catch me in the pasture.
Yes, ma'am. Well, Miss Lynn, I have kept you quite a long time. I've enjoyed the conversation
Oh,
tremendously. I hope I wasn't too challenging or confronting for you on some of that stuff, but I think it's good to make you fight for your argument a little bit, and maybe it brings out a few thoughts that you haven't had before, or something. Anyway.
Well, I think that went both ways. I challenged you too, and we can agree to disagree on some things, but I think on the really important things we are in agreement.
I think we agree on most of it. Yeah, sometimes I'm just playing the devil's advocate,
And that's always good for thinking things through. Yes, I very much enjoyed it, and I can't believe how much time has gone by. It's always exciting discussing
yes,
horses.
Ma'am. Well, again, the book is What Horses Really Want. Lots of pictures to go along with, lots of good information inside. And I really do appreciate the pictures. Again, I know what a pain it can be to capture all of that stuff. So kudos to your husband for his part in taking the pictures there. And if he gives you any bird watching vibes, tell him that feathers are keratin and so is hair and hooves. So essentially, it's the same thing, right? So.
Okay, there you go.
Anyway.
Yep.
All right. Well, we'll have links to find Lynn, her website, and social media stuff in the show notes, as always. And again, thank you very much for taking the time and coming on.
Thanks very much for inviting me, Daniel. It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next week for another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I've been your host, Daniel Dauphin.